Hey guys, Dark Humility here. You know what's catch me at www.twitch.tv/Dark Humility for 6 to 7 days a week of Diablo action, Diablo 4, D2R, PD2, and more. Today, I'm going to make a video that I typically never make. I'm going to make a video reacting or reviewing MrLlama's buy or Refund, my Fairest Review Yet video. I feel like that as a Diablo 2 player who has played probably over 30,000 plus hours in the game and, has tons of guides on max roll and has crazy amounts of just experience in general in the game, that I have a lot I can potentially offer here and critique. I've also, of course, gotten a Necromancer almost up to level 80 on Diablo 4 myself using a non-meta build even. So it's not like I went super easy mode or something that was easily reviewable or established. I actually went Blight, Corpse Explosion, Necromancer, of course. You can check that out, and I'm currently live streaming that. So anyway, let's get into the meat of it. Let me put out a disclaimer. I already watched this video. I already kind of looked at the way he reviewed things. And to be fair, he did say that, people are free to disagree and free to evaluate things very differently. However, I don't think, he's definitely, I think most people would consider MrLlama the face of Diablo 2. I have no beef with him. I love MrLlama. I think he's an awesome guy. However, speaking from myself, not for anybody else, I'm not speaking for anybody else, just myself. I feel like this review was incredibly biased, incredibly unfair to Diablo 4, and I think it sets the record a bit wrong for the Diablo 2 community. I think it affirms a lot of the biases that a lot of the Diablo 2 players already have, and I don't think it does a very good justice in terms of actually trying to evaluate Diablo 4 fairly compared to other games. See, I feel like you have to compare it to other games to really make a fair evaluation, and then you have to actually think about, compared to what could happen, exactly how good or bad something is. Uh Overall, I mean, I'll just give you a spoiler. He rated the game a 6, pretty much, like a 6.1. And as I'm going to show you guys, I came to a pretty different conclusion, one that gives you a very different idea of where Diablo 4 is at and whatnot. So, with all that being said, we're going to kind of skip along the video, and I'm going to kind of just show you kind of what he rates various things. I'm going to react to it, I'm going to review it, and then I'm going to, of course, show you guys my own ratings in those regards. So, without further ado, let's get into it. I do feel like I kind of have to make this to some extent. I get a lot of comments in my chat from Diablo 2 players, even loyal viewers that watch all my Diablo 2 content saying Diablo 4 is trash. I'd like to see if maybe I can give a bit more of a balanced perspective here, something that I feel is actually fair. Um, I that's kind of where I'm going with this. So let's do it. Let's smash it. Let's show you guys what's going on here.
It's rating. Not everything's just black and white, right?
So once again, like I said, he's very fair in telling people they can think what they want. But overall, I think his conclusion ends up being kind of biased. We're going to kind of skip along here to his actual reviews. He skipped too much of the campaign story, so he didn't actually have an applicable rating for it. Where I actually come down here is I got my own ratings here, as you can see. And I thought the campaign story was actually incredible. It was really well done, really well thought out. It kind of I really like the freedom versus tyranny campaign narrative in Diablo 4. I thought it was a very good narrative. I thought it was really cool indeed, and it kind of almost makes you wonder, if you had the choice as the character, would you actually want to take Lilith's side? I think really that's the only reason it doesn't get a 10, is because in some sense you're not given a choice, but it's not that type of a game, right? It's not some of those old like Star Wars RPGs where you could choose to be a Sith or a Jedi. But I don't know. I feel like there might have been a slightly missed opportunity there because of how well the evil is presented as possibly, a good option in this game. I think that's kind of interesting. All right, so let's continue here. Let's just show you. So he doesn't really have a rating for that. All right, so he has a music rating here, which is interesting.
Next, we have music, and I am giving music a 5.5 out of 10. And I'm giving a weight of 1. The reason I'm giving a 5.5 is, for me, it isn't very memorable. I think the music is totally fine. I think it fits with the area, right? It fits well with the areas, and that right there is nice. But overall, I just don't remember much. I remember the Ashava fight, and I remember like one.
See, I'm a Diablo 2 player, right? I'm a Diablo 2 player. I have a bias of a Diablo 2 player. Everyone's biased, right? But in order to not make a super overly biased and maybe to make some judgment as objective as possible, it's important to understand your biases and to kind of balance them out with maybe, evaluations of other things, or to kind of understand like why something does something well versus why something is not well. Music is something very easily, it's very easy to get nostalgic about music. And I gotta say, some of the music in Diablo 4 is very hype. I think when you rate something a 5, you're just saying like, oh, it's kind of like whatever, like overall. And I don't think that's necessarily fair. So when I give something like a 7 to a 10, we're looking at like a high rating. Something that's like 4 to a 6, it means it's like decent, kind of. 4 is not really decent, it's kind of low. And then anything that's low means it was garbage. Like they didn't even try, basically. That's kind of my particular interpretation of ratings from 1 to 10. And I don't think it's fair to say the music was kind of just bleh or okay. I would actually say it's a bit better than that. So if I have to review my own here, there you go, 7.5. 7.5. And yeah, we will be comparing these to my ratings for Diablo 3 and D2R if that isn't already clear. Once again, I think it's really important to kind of know where you stand in all these things. I've played enough Diablo 3 and I've watched enough of it to rate it absolutely. And D2R I've played, well, you can't LOD, I've played that game way too much. So once again, I know where my bias is. Like, I love Diablo 2. And I think it's important that we understand these things. But I also don't think it's fair to rate Diablo 4 a 6. And, as we continue here, we'll continue. Like, 6 is a game that I wouldn't recommend to people. And below a 5, I wouldn't even play it. So that's, like I said, not very fair exactly. But we'll continue. I thought the music was pretty good, though. The boss fight music was actually insanely good. Not just the world boss fight music, like capstone bosses. Music might not be insanely memorable in all cases, but your brain clearly does link to the music when you go to different regions. It seems to fit the theme of different regions, different quest lines, all kinds of things. It sets the tone very well. They do tone and environment insanely well in this game. I do agree with him somewhat though, in that some of the music doesn't feel like, wow. I'm totally wowed by it. Like I'll remember that from 5 years from now. Maybe not. Your brain might remember some of the cues though, but I wouldn't rate it insanely high, but I definitely wouldn't rate it like average. They did a really good job with a lot of the music in this game. So yeah, let's continue though. Let's see if we can. Okay, so he talks a lot about the campaign playthrough. So let's go in here.
I give it a 3.
A 3.
And I'm only going to give it a weighting
Wow.
of 1. This one I feel like I could give a
That
weight
means it
higher,
was
but
trash.
there's the skip campaign button,
Trash.
which I never really was thinking
Trash.
as something I would like. But after playing through this
Whoa.
campaign, I love it.
3?
And I want
If I rate something at 3, it's trash.
because the campaign was just a slog. And again, I wasn't doing the lore piece. I'm not saying what was the lore of the campaign. I'm saying simply
see
going
the
through
story
the
I thought was
campaign
good, but I
just
rated
didn't
it because
feel
I
fun.
went through most of that.
It was insanely easy.
I watched
if there
most of
was
the cinematics,
difficulty,
so
it was just damage
through most of
soaking,
it.
and that was it. Just like, oh, it's just like taking a long time. Nothing felt really hard. There was a ton of unskippable text.
So, all right, let's go through some of that. All right, I do agree there was a lot of unskippable text. It was a lot. There was a lot of unskippable text, and when you see my own rating on it, you'll see that I personally think that it is a little bit of a problem. But it's World Tier 1. It's meant to be, in some sense, the campaign is meant to be, in some ways, a tutorial mode for the endgame. It's not meant to be absurdly difficult. It's not meant to be insanely hard or anything of that nature. So, like, for me, that's, I don't know. Like, too easy, sure. But for a lot of players, they might find it kind of difficult. The density also wasn't very good either, I will say. So I don't necessarily rate the campaign insanely high. But in terms of executing an interesting campaign as you move through it, some of the boss fights were kind of challenging. Some of the stuff was, even in Tier 1, you would take a ton of damage from a lot of stuff. I think to some extent, you could rate this higher or lower. I would say there are tedious elements with it though, absolutely. So I'm not like totally behind it, but I'm also not saying it's like it's crazy good necessarily. But I don't know if it's fair to say it was bad because of this. I definitely feel like that's something you would only play once, but I don't know. Like, who wants to go through the campaign on Diablo 2 more than once? Not really. I mean, that's not why you play it. It's not the campaign. It's because of the drops in the progression through the game. So, I don't really think that's the point of a campaign. The point of a campaign is to execute a good story. And then, of course, from there, to be like, well, I mean, is it appropriate difficulty for the beginning of the game? Does it provide some level of challenge? I would say it does do those things. I could see people dying to the final Lilith fight quite a bit. I didn't die, but I got very close many times, even on World Tier 1. So that's interesting. It's interesting to think.
Obviously, there was all the like skippable cutscenes, but then there was just the unskippable cutscenes where you just have to sit there.
Yeah, this is where he talks
for the guy
about.
To walk over.
He talks about
turn, and then he talks.
How
I'm talking like
how everything's just really slow and sluggish, and yeah, for sure, there's definitely a decent amount of that. But they kind of have to make it that way. They're trying to make it feel immersive. They don't want to make it feel like nothing's happening. They wanted to make it like a full immersive campaign experience. It has drawbacks, though. It has drawbacks. They could have definitely taken some of that out. And to some extent, that is why Diablo 2 feels quite a bit better. But I suppose before we move on, we should probably show you guys kind of where I'm at on this. So we have a fair evaluation here. All right, so a 7. Now, honestly, if I'm being honest, I could even put it down to like a 6. I could put it down to a 6, and then we have 7.69. I think that's fair. It was done for what a campaign should be. I don't think the game even really encourages you to play through it multiple times because you get the credit for the campaign with one character. That is the point. So I think it's kind of unfair to just say it's terrible because of that, because that is the point of it. I do kind of mention some of the same stuff he does though in his video about monster density. He'll talk more about like monster density, um, but it's not meant to be like a farming area anyway. So yeah, I don't think it's incredible like the actual playthrough experience. I think it's immersive in the way it's supposed to be, but it could be better. Dialogue is kind of crazy. That is true. I do agree with them almost 100%. There are definitely a lot of points of agreement I have, but as you'll see, some things I think are insanely harsh, and I'll try to explain why as best as I can.
Like, at least in really love.
So he spends a while on
Just
this.
can't do
He does.
meaningless affixes, including.
All right, let's go to itemization.
I'm trying to say, it's better than Diablo 3 because I like the affixes a little bit more. I'm not just like pure.
So he admits it's better than Diablo 3. Okay. So what does that mean? Diablo 3 is a 1? He put itemization at a 2. A 2. A freaking 2. So Diablo 3 had to have been a 1. It's only 1 point better than Diablo 3? I'm going to explain why that's not the case here in a second. There's no way you could possibly evaluate it that badly. But I'm also going to split this evaluation because I feel like there's also another component of this that has to be evaluated, which is the item drop system, not just how you itemize your character. So he didn't even evaluate it at all, which, you know, I think that's a bit of a shame because, like he does mention later on in there, he mentions that it's a very key part to an ARPG, and I agree with that. It's very essential, very essential.
Or stat hunting, right? But there's a ton of like meaningless affixes, including things like resistances and stuff.
He's right. There are a couple, but mainly resistances. And you'll notice that in this video, he repeats resistances a lot. A lot.
Dynamic scaling within the game hurts itemization even more because you like level up and then your items are like weaker because you need to be upgrading your items. That's like so much
because
power.
He's right. Resistances are a little weak. That
gems
like fire resistance, cold resistance stats are a little.
You never care about gems ever again in the game.
But not a lot. You know, they are effective.
So it's like nothing there. The good thing, the like nice fun thing is hunting for rares still is kind of fun, but because there is this item power and you know it's like you don't want a weapon that has like under 800 item power, 785 item power, so you need to have a high item power, but you can't always tell, so you're picking up items and then you look at them and they just have a low item power and so you just have to toss them, and it's like it doesn't even matter what the affixes are. If it has a low item power, it's just garbage. I just feel like this was a big miss, and itemization was something that, you know, from the get-go, I was hoping that they would do more with. And they were saying, yeah, we're going to make other items like matter, magics, and whites, and all this stuff. It doesn't.
So he makes a lot of good points here, Mr. Llama does. Of course he does. But let's be real, okay? Whites don't matter in like any ARPGs. I don't know why anyone would expect that as part of a rating. Blues matter rarely in Diablo 2. Now, this is stuff that I honestly feel like Diablo 4 could improve on quite a bit. Now, let's move on to my own rating so you guys can see for context where we're at here. I give it a 6 with a weight of 5. So arguably, even though it's not nearly as bad as his rating, it almost does as much damage to the overall score on this. Now you can see my final rating, of course, of the game as well down here. So you can already see where we're going. 7.7. All right. That I feel is actually a bit of a And that is a fair evaluation. But in order to get to this fair evaluation, we're gonna have to continue to show you guys kind of where I'm at on things. Now, itemization. I do think that one thing that's really good about D4, despite the fact that some types of items aren't as good, maybe some stats aren't as good, and of course the item scaling, it means in the end game, obviously you're not going to be using stuff that you found in normal, but that's the case for Diablo 2, it's the case for pretty much any game. I mean, is that once you get to the final difficulty, that's where you find the items that are good. So that doesn't really, I don't think, negatively impact the evaluation of items in Diablo 4. I don't think there's any difference. Once again, you have to have a point of comparison, or you have to have multiple points of comparison if you want to really make a fair evaluation. I could even, if I played Path of Exile a lot, which I haven't, I would even put that in my evaluation because it's more accurate. It's good. So one thing I think that's really good about itemization, something I mentioned here, is that you're always looking to upgrade your gear along the way, which is good. That means you're constantly interacting with the gear, and that the gear you pick up might actually be better. One thing to note is in the beginning of the game, actually throughout the full campaign, I actually used a blue item in one of my slots just because I couldn't find something that had more rings to my skill in that slot, or had rings to that skill as a rare. So in some cases, the blues can outstrip the rares pretty long into the game. But it would be interesting if blues, I do admit, just like in Diablo 2, had more impact, or different types of items had more impact in the late game. Of course, it's really rare for that to be the case in D2. I made a post actually on Maxwell detailing valuable magic items, and I think they're pretty ridiculous, right? They're pretty rare. So, but that is part of the fun, though, of an ARPG. I do think the transitions are a little awkward, though, between each of them. It almost feels like once you get to the new difficulty, all the previous items are going to become totally inferior to pretty much any of the items you find in the new difficulty, and that happens pretty quickly. I would prefer if the transitions weren't quite as harsh with the itemization. This is why I only rated a 6. I think the upgrading is good. I think the stats are meaningful, and looking at the stats carefully actually does matter quite a bit. The items do matter in terms of the build customization. When it comes to any particular build, though, the items are almost telegraphed, especially in terms of the aspects that you add to them as well. So, in other words, it's pretty obvious what you're going to go in this regard. There's like certain amount of aspects. If you're doing a certain kind of build, there's probably going to be like somewhere between 10 or 15 that are good, as MrLlama does mention in his video. I'm not going to show it necessarily, but he does mention that. And there you go, is true. I think, though, that finding maybe torment items in the end of Nightmare would be pretty cool. I do think making them maybe super rare would be kind of neat, so that like by the time you get to Torment, it's possible that you're 100% ready for it at least, instead of just getting blasted in the face by that transition. Transition's kind of weird. Like I said, lack of item diversity in many cases, but if you think about the number of builds in the game, it isn't really that much of a lack of diversity. Um, and like I said, I really critique how he talks about, of course, items you find later in the game should be better than items you find earlier in the game most of the time. Now, obviously, Diablo 2, you can find end-game items earlier than that, and that's kind of what I'm talking about, is that these transitions maybe don't have to be quite as ingrained, and that's a pretty major criticism I have personally. And then, of course, there are certain items or stats lacking impact, like certain uniques. Maybe they're not as good as they could be, so they can. Because I feel like the legendary aspects in a lot of cases are a lot better than the unique item bonuses, which happen later on. By the way, uniques are different than legendaries. Legendaries are kind of the equivalent of like a Diablo 2 set, or like a medium point between like a rare and a set item, or maybe even a rare item. Like in some sense, rares in Diablo 4 are as rare as like a Diablo 2 blue item. And then legendaries are like that game's version of a rare item in terms of rarity. And I think that makes sense. So don't get fooled by the colors. I think people get caught up by the colors. They see the brown text and are like, oh wow, it's super easy and it's too boring to find everything because they're dropping like candy. It's like no, because the game works a bit differently, and uniques are actually very rare. They're about as rare as Diablo 2 uniques, I would say, based on playing the game. Um, Maybe even more so in a lot of cases. So you're looking for that kind of impact. Like I said, I think there are definitely a lot of items and stats lacking in impact, so that's a ding. The transitions are pretty bad, I think. That's a ding. But overall, like trying to min-max your items and looking for perfect stat combinations for your build and customizing your build and the interactions between your items and the aspects and your skilling of your build is actually really solid. So I can't in good faith give it less than a decent rating. I just can't because there's actually some really good systems here. Now, one thing he does not evaluate, but we definitely need to talk about here is the item drop system. So he doesn't talk about the drop system. So rarity of items. I give it a 5. And I feel like once again, the fact that like items you find early on have no chance of being impactful later in the game kind of does hurt quite a bit. Um Actually, before I talk about this, let me go back to itemization for a second. So think about Diablo 2. In Diablo 2, in the end game, you do typically have a lot of the same items. So it's not too different from D4. I don't really consider that a terrible thing. I think that's inevitable. Like when you make a certain build, if you have a lot of build diversity, how many different item combinations are really possible for one build out of like hundreds potentially? What is actually possible there? There's nothing. There's literally nothing that's possible there whatsoever. So there's usually one item combination that's optimal, right? Think about a Hammerden, Enigma, Shaco, Toto, Spirit, or Haas, plus like 215 Paladin Amulet, and or 220 Paladin Amulet, or 210, or whatever, or a Mars, and it's the same stuff. There's very little versatility within an individual build, and since D4 has way more build potential, I definitely can't ding D4 for that because they've got a ton of aspects, which actually a lot more than just like a lot of those like base uniques or rune words you pretty much end up with every single time on a game that's as amazing as Diablo 2. So obviously, I don't think that's much of a ding. Let's go to the item drop system though. So I have a bit more problems with this. I think when it comes down, this really is mostly about rarity, item rarity, and the feeling of finding an incredible item. And this, I feel like, with the unique items, is a thing in Diablo 4 to some extent. So it's not like there's items with varying, not like there's items with varying rarity and whatnot, or materials, and finding them does feel fun and impactful. But my major critique of the D4 system, and this is, I think, the lowest rating I give anything on Diablo 4, and I weight it really high. Once again, I feel like itemization and item drops is really big. Like, you could weight these at 10 almost because, like, they're like, I mean, I think that'd be unfair to like everything else when it comes to the game, especially for if you're trying to consider like casual and like hardcore gamers in the same pool, or hardcore versus softcore players in the same pool. But yeah, the item drop system, I don't know. There's no burr roots. There's nothing like, oh my goodness, I just found something insanely rare. Like besides maybe some uniques, which is yet to be seen. There's not a lot of that going on. Even in the early days of Diablo 2, they had a lot more items like that. And a lot of the fun of playing these is the RNG of just like, it's that kind of, it's that struggle, going through the struggle of like not finding anything for a long period of time. And then you get that bump, you get that hit when you get that insanely crazy item, get that dopamine hit. And the fact that I think D4 devs appear to undervalue that is kind of sad, because I feel like what's really addicting and what keeps people engaged with these games is the fact that there are things like that. Now, this could come in later expansions. There's a lot of potential to improve here, but I definitely think these kinds of things are definitely where I feel like the game needs the most work. I don't think they're horrible though, and as you see when I kind of quickly go over my D3 and D2R evaluations at the end of this, they're not nearly as bad as like D3 or something. But yeah, still kind of basic in some sense, still kind of lacking that dopamine hit of finding that insane item, and that stuff definitely could be improved quite a bit. And I think these, because of this alone, I can see a lot of Diablo 2 players having maybe some issues with Diablo 4. But if you want to give a fair and full and complete evaluation of the game, you also have to acknowledge that it's not terrible. One, there actually is something to their item drop system and their itemization of the game. But yeah, there's a lot to be, it could be improved. It's not terrible. There's a lot could be improved. All right, so let's continue here. What do we do next? So he talks about action. Talks more about that, of course.
This game is quite decent, right? I like the
action
pacing
is decent
for when you're out of the campaign and you're kind of moving around, running around, killing stuff. I think it fits extremely well with that. I'm having fun with it. I think, again, a game like Path of Exile, any of these modern ARPGs, the action style.
So he does some comparison here to other modern ARPGs, which is really good. I think this is one point where he is clearly drawing a obvious comparison here. So yeah, I think a lot of his ratings overall are overly harsh because they just don't take into account what could be possible and the positives of some of these elements, particularly itemization. I could never rate that in good faith as a 2. That just doesn't make any sense to me, for all the reasons I stated. And I mentioned the negatives, but I brought up a lot of positives. I mean, there's some good stuff going on there. When it comes to action, though, yeah, I agree with him. I just agree with him. It's that simple. Not much to talk about here. The action, I just label it action combat mechanics. The combat feels amazing in Diablo 4. I don't think you can rate that badly, and he didn't rate it badly. I think it feels fluid combat that is meaty and visceral. I like it. I like the pacing of it. I think it's way better than D3 because it's not every build is super zoomy. There are rogue builds, or rather just the rogue in general in Diablo 4 is an exception to this, but I think that's more of a balance issue. Overall, the game currently feels really good to play. So there's that. All right, let's continue. Definitely want to spend a lot of time on the itemization stuff, though.
It's a little overtuned, and I think just so much focus on the action that the RPG, the role-playing game.
So this is where he talks about, all right, role-playing. Okay, so the fact, maybe character identity, that's kind of what I drove home from it. He's talking about like the characters don't really feel or look different. I kind of highly disagree with this, but I'll kind of explain here in a moment why.
Game piece of it feels kind of removed. I don't feel as attached to my character as I...
See, I don't really know what he's on about here, to be honest. I mean, I guess he's talking about the iconicism of the characters. That's my best guess. But yeah, he's talking like about he doesn't feel attached to the characters because they don't really play as much of a role, because most characters just do damage. Maybe there's no like healers and stuff. But what's interesting is I think more people would criticize it if, especially Diablo 2 players, I know they would, if it had things like healers, they'd be like, oh, that's even more WoW-like. That's even more like World of Warcraft. MMOs get a bad rap in the ARPG scene, especially Diablo 2 players. They don't like the fact that there's even a lot of MMO elements in D4. See, I would describe D4 as a game. It is a ARPG with MMO elements. Okay, that's my personal description. There are MMO elements. There's a lot of quest lines. There's world bossing. They've got, there's definitely a lot of those types of things. You know, it's got the open world thing, you know, it's got mounts. Yeah, there's stuff from MMOs, but it's still fundamentally an ARPG or an RPG. Anyway,
would in the previous days.
we can
And I
continue
think a
this a
lot of
bit
that's
here,
just
though.
because it's just build and spam.
This
and
video
fly
is
around
likely
and
to be
kill
quite a bit
everything.
longer than his because I feel like I'm going to go into a bit more detail.
I think this is
but
just true. I don't
what
think
it-
any
this
of
is
the
what
modern
it is. This
RPGs
is
get
what it
over
is.
a 5 for me, honestly. I think this fits just as well for the other ones.
So yeah, he doesn't think in modern ARPGs they do a very good job of, you know, making characters feel impactful or iconic or things of that nature. So I kind of get it. I kind of get it. I do, but I also don't. So I think he rated a 5. You know, what was his rating? A 5. Yeah, a 5. Okay. So class identity. Yeah, in some sense, by the way, I did rate itemization a 10 because I literally split it into 2 different categories. But I think itemization is so important. You need a lot of weighting. Class identity. So that's what I call it. Class identity. So I think overall we give it a rating of 7.5 or a weight of 2. And yeah, I didn't change his weightings too much. Like I weighted these things even more highly because I think they should be. But I didn't change most of them. I might have tweaked them slightly because I thought maybe they weren't as important. But overall, yeah, I tried to keep most of his weightings, literally just doing exactly what he did. Just to show you guys kind of like where I'm at and kind of like it is my opinion at the end of the day, but I feel like I have some pretty good arguments, and maybe you guys will agree, maybe you guys won't. Anyway, classes, I pretty highly disagree with this. You'll see I rated it quite a bit higher. Classes feel and look different, Diablo 4. Quite a bit. As a matter of fact, one of the biggest criticisms with balance seems to be almost the fact that there is too much identity because there's not enough mobility on some classes, and some classes just do a ton of damage. Some classes have more resource issues. There's actually a lot of class identity. There's a lot of every class looks and feels quite different. But there could be more item identity to go along with it, which kind of goes back to itemization. There's a lot of like class specific gear. The gear doesn't feel as class specific in D4. Yeah, there is class specific gear, but it doesn't feel like the identity is there. Like one thing that games like D2 does very well is the item feels very unique. You'll have items that feel insanely unique for that particular character. And I guess the only things that kind of fit that mold in D4 are unique items, and only to some extent. So there could be more identity, but man, oh man, I think one of the biggest criticisms of D4 is that the classes are just so different. So different to the extent that some classes just, because of their mobility, are just so much better than others. So actually, in terms of at least solo gameplay, the barbs and the druids and whatnot, you know, druids are quite a bit slower, but they're amazing at buffing groups. So I really disagree with the fact that it's a bad element of Diablo 4, or at least even he just rated it kind of bleh. Like 5 is a bleh rating. Really, it's kind of bleh. It's like that's not very good. I don't know. I don't think that's fair at all.
But I and so plays a little bit into the RPG standpoint, which gives me some feeling that I enjoy somewhat with it.
Right. That's true. All right, so builds. I think you have to evaluate builds separately from itemization, but also itemization does influence the number of builds and the kind of builds. So what I did, I'm just going to show you guys real quick. Build diversity. Okay, build diversity. So look at this. I think this is a much more, first of all, useful way to think about it. He rated builds as bleh as well. But there are a lot of different ways to build even different builds within builds in terms of like first hardcore versus softcore, And the skills and the items and the paragons and the aspects and everything really come together in some very interesting ways. Now, obviously, balance is going to impact the builds that people actually want to play. But the truth is there's probably hundreds of viable builds currently in Diablo 4. That is amazing. Okay, there are a ton of options. And just playing all the way through the late game and playing a lot of beta and whatnot, I have seen so many options for like different ways to build and to play a character. It also interacts in terms of like, I would even put build plus playstyle diversity because they really I think they hit a home run here, honestly. Personally, I think they did an amazing job with this. I think it could be better. And then, once again, I think it's what Mr. Llama mostly says there, which is the lack of itemization options and the kind of bleg itemization, sort of bleg itemization. The itemization, the item stats can be interesting and impactful depending on the build, and the item stats definitely matter quite a bit, which is why I rate it decently. But some of it does feel a little lackluster. And you compare it to Diablo 2 stats, and there's a lot more of those types of stats, but those stats also have a much larger impact on the game, which of course I'll talk about briefly when we go over Diablo 2. At any rate, that stuff is pretty good though. I don't really understand why these are rated so harshly. Like I don't know. It's definitely. I mean, he recognizes he has a bias and it's its own opinion, but man, like this stuff, I feel like unintentionally maybe engenders some toxicity within the Diablo 2 community. It makes people think, oh yeah, of course this game's garbage. Look at all this stuff. It's either, on any of the important stuff, it's barely getting above 5. It's like or it's not even getting a 5. It's not. It's not good. It's not good. I think these are unfair evaluations. They're overly harsh.
You only have like certain core skills, right? It's like I'm playing ice shards. I'm playing.
He's right about this. There are only like 5 core skills, but within those core skills, there's like literally like 5 different builds you can play using those core skills, or at least 2 to 3 for each one. Like, because there's 6 skills on the bar and you can't infinitely spam them, all the skills could potentially be useful on the entire skill tree, which is a lot. The skill tree is amazing in D4. Like, it's honestly like the D2 skill tree, but on steroids. It's like even more well refined, and it's kind of based on the D2 skill tree because you have to get to a certain level to unlock lower tiers on the skill tree. I really like it. I think it does it really well. And it opens up a lot of builds. So this is kind of where I'm not on the same page with it.
Chain lightning, I play whatever it is. It's like you have like a few core skills, and that's the main thing you're going to be using. And so a lot of the builds just don't. There's just like not a ton. And then if there wasn't such scaling as well on damage, I think that would improve other builds as well, right? Because it's like, oh, okay, I was playing Firewall, but then Firewall just fell off. And it just really, and the scaling of this was just better.
Well, so there he's talking about balance, and that's something that I think is important not to conflate here when you're trying to review something. One, balance is always terrible on a game launch. I'm not reviewing balance on purpose. I think balance is always a problem. Balance is something that's always a work in progress for every game. It will never be different. There is no way to make balance better. So to evaluate a game on launch on balance, I feel, is, there's always something you could say, point to, yes, that one has bigger damage numbers and moves faster. There you go. That build is objectively better. We at MaxRoll, we do pretty extensive tier lists, which is pretty awesome. But yeah, so that's just the truth. That's just the truth, man. Like, it's you can't evaluate balance like that.
So I just feel like builds is in the middle, right? It's like there's some builds you can definitely play. There's not just like one build to play, but I think they can do some work.
There's a ton of builds you could play. Paragon boards open up so many options
with it, and it will improve right there.
I don't know.
Completionism, I am giving an 8.5.
So completionism. All right. What is completionism? This means I'm assuming like how it feels to like 100% the game. I agree with him. I think it's about there. I have no qualms with his rating there. I think it's fair. It's a fun game to try to get 100% of your renown in. There's a lot of interesting activities that play into that. You know, making dungeons, side quests, and Lilith altar hunting, and just exploring the areas. Like all these little tiny rewards for just like going throughout the world and doing things is actually pretty dang good. It's a pretty solid thing. I don't have any issues with this evaluation. I think that's what he's trying to evaluate here.
The weight is missing on this, and completing more of the area and more of the world. So I think that's really great. Thought. The only knockoff is the side quests. I think are the least interesting.
And that's what I agree with him on. Some of the side quests are interesting, and they're actually kind of cool, especially if you go through the dialogue. Seems like he just skipped everything. I didn't skip everything, so I could get kind of an idea of how a lot of this stuff was. But now a lot of the side quests are kind of interesting. Some of them feel kind of asinine, though, for sure. Which is why I also don't rate it higher than an 8.5. I just agree with his rating there.
Piece. I want to watch the cinematics again. Otherwise.
So I am once again in agreement with him on this point. I don't think there's a lot of disagreement here. So cinematics basically are insane from any Blizzard game. Heck, even the Diablo 3, if we go here real quick to look at the Diablo 3 one. Cinematics 9, 10. Honestly, I think Blizzard should very, very much consider like turning into a movie studio. You know, I think they're good at making games, but they're great at making movies. I think they would make a ton of money at the box office if they really wanted to. Heck, they could turn their games into movies very easily as long as they do that quality all the way through. I think, yeah, pretty insane stuff. Now, just like Mr. Llama, though, I do recognize that there are some issues here with the fact that you just can't see the campaign cinematics. Literally, unless you're playing the campaign. There's nowhere else to view them. I think that's kind of a shame. And, you know, he also identified the same thing.
Blizzard always knocks it out of the park on cinematics. It is absolutely amazing. Pointing. Have them to watch again?
Yeah, you don't have them to watch again. All right. Another point of agreement between me and Mr. Llama. See, this is where, you know, I feel like these last three, I'm like, yeah, I get these reviews. They're fair. They are fair. Fair. But see, this is how we end up leading to different conclusions of some of the stuff that I feel like is very overly harsh, and maybe if I use the word jaded.
Because it's still kind of temporary. We don't have everybody on their level 100 build.
Remember, guys, you know, expansions, the original D2 Classic, the itemization was arguably just as one note or two note as Diablo 4 is in some cases. As Classic D2 was just the same as Diablo 4. Rares, checking out all the rares, some uniques that could be useful, maybe some insane blues. I guess the Classic D2 might have had a little bit of an edge, but it really wasn't that different. So with expansions, and, you know, they've planned ruins and rainward things, I honestly didn't think itemization in D2 was really truly good until the expansion came out. I know not everyone agrees with that. Some people think it ruined it. But I think it really added a lot more depth to it, and especially the item drop system on top of it. So, yeah.
It's all stacked out and everything like that. But I was doing PvP at level like
PvP
40, 50, 60,
really good.
70. And it was a blast. It was honestly super fun. We were just in our parties.
He's right about this. The PvP in Diablo 4 is incredible. If you are a PvP player, you, I think, are going to very much enjoy Diablo 4. If I was a PvPer, I'd buy Diablo 4 right now. It's insane. They got PvP specific items and, got small buffs that you can use in the area. They got PvP currency that you can use to get some of those buffs and advantages as you continue to traverse the area. The longer you spend in the zone and kill monsters, the more likely you are to be killed by other players, and you can generate the currency with that. And there's very difficult, good to farm monsters in these zones to encourage people to want to be in there and possibly get wrecked. They did so many good things. I do think there might be a little too much monster density, though, because it kind of maybe takes away from the players. Maybe what they could do is, if a player actually engages another player in combat around that area, the monster density is greatly thinned out. That would be interesting if they could somehow program that in. But otherwise, it's a 9 out of 10. It's insane. And I even, I tested it out. It feels really fun to fight other players. The potion cooldowns are good. Just the feeling of the smoothness of the abilities. The balance obviously is maybe not perfect, obviously, but balance with any of the skills in the game isn't perfect yet. So this is something they're still working on. I have no issues with this.
Running around, blast.
So right now I'm just agreeing with him. I think this is good stuff. This is good
visibility.
And he's right. There's some visibility issues, mostly because too many monsters sometimes. That's what I agree with.
This is where they can really improve the game. Easiest to improve. Gem tab or a bag, overlay minimap, a loot filter would.
So these are a lot of things I agree with. I think it'd be cool to be able to put everything. But having your gems in 7 slots versus 1 is not that big of a deal. Let's be honest. Loot filter definitely could be pretty big. Items aren't dropping constantly, though, from absolutely everything, though. So I don't know how impactful that is. I guess in really dense areas that could be pretty impactful. An overlay mini-map, though, that is something I do agree with. Having to press tab every time is kind of annoying. Now, sure, you can still be moving while pressing tab, but not the most ideal thing. So he's right about some of this quality of life stuff. He really is. He's definitely right about some of this quality of life. I think a lot of it is lacking. But I also don't evaluate it quite as harshly as he does. So I put it at a 6 because there is a lot of good quality of life in the game. The items only take up 1 slot. There's a decent amount of space. There could be more stash tabs, though. I agree with that as well. That's something he doesn't even mention in his video. I think that could be another thing as well. But you stack almost any material effortlessly. You literally just have a item tab for a lot of your materials. They don't even go in the stash at all. Arguably, you could do the same for gems, though. So that's an interesting thing. I think there's a lot of improvement here, but I also don't think a 5 is exactly fair because the game does a pretty decent job at this, or at least a slightly better than decent job at this. But like all ARPG gamers, we always want more quality of life, and maybe it's not quite where it could be yet. I actually had it, I think, at a 7, so the final rating here actually kind of dipped when I was a bit more, I think, accurate with it. But I don't disagree too much with what he's saying here. I also don't think it's weighted insanely high either, like he doesn't as well, because it doesn't really make you not want to play the game.
Yeah, being able to. Anyways, I think that's where they could have 10 out of 10. Super easy. Overall UI?
It's true. It's true. Now, UI, UI is an interesting issue because for some, I don't know why people care so much about this, but this is where I feel like Diablo 4 gets maybe some of the worst rap. I mean, besides maybe the itemization and stuff. But like, this is I don't know. I'm not like a huge like wow, this game has horrible UI, so I'm not gonna play it. I actually lowered the weight, I think, on this. What did he end up weighting it?
I'm actually.
Oh, actually, no, he weighted it the same. He weighted it 1.5. I don't think it's that bad. They had to balance considerations between console and PC. I think this is just inevitable. I don't think you could ding them for that, though. I don't think that's really fair, and it's going to impact your overall rating in a way that is not good. Now, some things are spaced out too much. Some things are hard to zoom into, like the Paragon board or the skill tree. He's right about these things. He is. But it is solid and it is functional. Overall, the UI is very functional. I think also the fact that you might be zoomed in, people do complain about this quite a bit in D4, is because you're not very zoomed in. You're just kind of more zoomed in. And that's because the game can be played on an ultra wide monitor. And they want to make sure they don't give those players too much of an advantage. It's that simple. They had to balance it. It kind of depends on your monitor and whatnot, what it actually looks like to be zoomed in. So there you have it. They did what they could do. I don't see how you could do very much more with that. I don't think it's that big of a deal. As you'll see with my rating here, I'll rate it as 7. There are some things they could improve though. They're pretty sizable, but they're not a big deal. I think where it gets a lot of hate is because the UI kind of looks like, once again, some people might say a console or a mobile game or a Diablo 3. And people be just like straight up just judging the book by its cover. Or that's literally what they're doing when they are judging Diablo 4. A lot of people that haven't seen the game before, the first impression they get is the cover of the book. They see it, it's like, it looks too much like D3. And then they don't even like no more interest in it. And that's literally just a jaded view though. Super jaded, super dismissive, pretty I don't know, pretty close-minded, I would say. I'm actually going to call out some aspects some members of the community here. I really think that's not good because this game is definitely not Diablo 3. It is so much better in so many categories. As I'll show you guys with my own ratings here, I am a Diablo 3 hater. Take that into account. I don't make these ratings lightly. I was expecting to hate Diablo 4 maybe, just like a lot of you guys were as well. I didn't have any expectations. I try to keep an open mind, which is why I ended up with these results. But I do realize a lot of people are they're stuck in their, old ways or whatever ways Diablo 2 did things, and then they kind of like totally miss the bigger picture. I think that's a real problem here.
And give a 5.5, which is higher than I thought I would. I do think it still looks mobile and console.
Yeah. Mobile and console.
The more I've played with it, the more
that's why it rates it a 5, and a 5 is a pretty bleh rating. I don't think it's that bad.
Like, okay, I'm like used to it. It's not like
it's just unfair,
terrible.
Unfair.
I don't love the UI. I don't think it's amazing. Like I say, I still think it has really that like look for a different, not for a PC. The skill tree is one of my biggest complaints, and the Paragon boards.
Yeah, like, right. Yeah, that's my big complaint, but that's not going to bring it down to a 5.5. I mean, you could still do it. It's still navigatable. It's not that bad. It's not that hard to navigate. Come on now. Like, what more could they do? There's very little improvement, really. There's not that much improvement. I think I could even rate it an 8, but I'll be somewhat harsh on that. I'll try to be as harsh as I can be, All right, so ease of access
into it, but I think when you get to the end game, it actually will just be confusing for a lot of people. Again, with like the different affixes and all of this stuff, I think there's just a lot of like confusion. Like burning damage is not fire damage.
Some of this stuff is kind of just asinine that he starts talking about here when he talks about ease of access. I don't really know what he's on about here in some cases. It's kind of like I agree with a lot of the things, like I said, I got some similar stuff, but like when it comes to some things like this, like why is he be rating this stuff like fives? Like it's not that bad, you know? You gotta be real. Okay, you gotta be real about these things. And it's not that bad. It's not that bad. He starts talking about like burning versus fire damage. It's like, well, fire damage doesn't always have a burning over time effect. That's what they're trying to explain, It's not that big of a deal. So he's saying that because of these things, new players might get confused. I don't know. I mean, it shows the damage over time. It describes it as a special type of damage. What more do you want them to do?
Resistances are actually worthless, but damage reduction from close enemies is much more valuable. Like there's a lot of like issues.
Yeah, there are. See, this is kind of a little bit strange to me because Diablo 2 players want complexity in their stats. They want different kinds of stats that can matter in different situations. They also want stats that maybe enable different playstyles. But at the same time, you have the face of Diablo 2 here complaining about literally having those kinds of stats in Diablo 4 and then making itemization rated a 2. See, this is what I don't understand about this review. So by the time I get to this point in my review here, of his review, my reaction to it, this is where I start to get a little frustrated. All right. I get a little frustrated because it's like, okay, you want stuff that enables different playstyles. You want interesting itemization. And yet, now you're saying it's confusing. Which is it? Can't have your cake and eat it too. What do you actually want? So this is where he's contradicting himself. He's literally contradicting himself. And I can't in good faith stand behind this evaluation because of it. He starts to contradict himself here. And I actually like things like close monster, distant monster damage, or damage reduction. Because now that changes how you might play the build. Whether you literally evade into the monsters versus you stand back and fire at the monsters. It changes how you play the build. And in hardcore versus softcore, it's also a very meaningful distinction. Because in hardcore, maybe you don't want to jump into the monsters. Right? Right. Okay, so it creates some meaningful interactions. So now he's saying it's too confusing. I don't know. I don't get this at all.
Issues like that are really just going to confuse people.
Let's let him cook a bit, though.
It doesn't make sense to a casual player of the game. You really have to go and look and stuff.
Let MrLlama talk.
And so I think there's plenty of room here to improve it. Just the way that the itemization is currently functioning, resistances don't actually give you much.
So again, he mentions the resistances. Yes, the resistances have maybe a little bit too low of an impact, but that's an easy balance fix. Is that a reason to rate things 2s and 5s? I don't think so. It's still impactful, mind you. It is. I use resistance potions, and they help quite a bit against nightmare dungeons that have those elemental affixes. That's not a thing. That's not a thing. I don't get it. I really don't get it at all. So, yeah,
value.
It just things get confusing. But see, people also complain about the Paragon board getting confusing, but it's like, no, it's not. It's pretty straightforward, like which things you want depending on your build. But then some people also in the same breath talk about it being too simplistic. It's like, I'm pretty sure he, later on, if I remember right, talks about the Paragon boards. When he talks about them, he talks about them being too simple and blah. But then he talks about everything being confusing, especially in the endgame here. So which is it? Is it too simple or is it too complex? What is it? What is it? My answer is that it's just right. It actually does a really good job of bridging the gap between like a Path of Exile and a Diablo 3. Diablo 3, everything is done for you. The game plays itself. Path of Exile, you need a PhD to play the game. Diablo 4 actually, you know, there are meaningful, interesting choices that you actually have to think about. But you also don't need to be an expert in the game to figure out like what Paragon board oftentimes would be optimal in a build. If you look at the legendary node, especially if you look at the rare nodes and the stats they give, it'd be like, is that stat useful for this build? Does this build skill on crit damage? Does this build skill on whatever? It's not that bad. It's not that bad. But it's also not overly simplistic, and it gives you a lot of options. Sometimes you, especially in terms of when you level up, like what should you prioritize? It gives you options. These are good things. Diablo 4 does a very good job, I feel, in these. You know, it's not there. For him, it's not there. So I just put accessibility. I don't know if he's just talking for new players, old players, but I actually put it at an 8. I highly disagree with his rating here. The game is both simple and complex, only adding layers of complexity towards the end game, right? It's not that complex until you get to the end game, where the most serious players like to grind anyway. So what they did was they backloaded the complexity for the players that will typically want that complexity to begin with, the players that are actually going to go that far into the game. That's actually smart. It caters to both player base as well, without making things too difficult. They do a good job. I think they could have done a better job, maybe to some extent. I think they could have made it even more complex, maybe in the end game, and they could have added even more layers if they wanted to for the really serious grinders. Maybe. But I think they do a pretty decent job of that already, and I really don't have a lot of complaints here. Once again, this is where I think it starts to become kind of asinine and contradictory.
As opposed to other...
really much so. Like, it's one thing if he just hated the itemization, but then he contradicts himself.
Fixes. Burning is fire. Fire isn't burning. Skill damage plus to cold damage. And I had to go and like look up and figure out, okay, so frost is the tag of the frost, but there's no tag of cold. Cold is just overall cold.
Right. Now, he is right about some things, and that's once again why I don't rate the accessibility a 10. Some of the things aren't insanely clear, like what damage percentages on items apply to certain skills. If I thought they totally knocked it out of the park, I would have rated it like a 9 or a 10. But there are some things that he mentions is here that do make some sense. I'm gonna give him credit where it's due. You know, that's how I like to evaluate and do reviews or reactions to videos. I give credit where it's due, but I also don't get a rating of a 5. No way. They did a pretty dang good job. They had to.
It's confusing. Monster.
But he's right. There's a lot of different damage types. It's hard to know what they apply to. But these different stats are interesting, and they do allow for a lot of build diversity. Because if you think about it, some stats maybe are not a pure cold build. You know, maybe the cold damage is no good, but the skill damage is. So that makes different rares interesting, and that's why looking at the rares is interesting.
Monster design. I give it a 6, actually. Again, a little higher than I was kind of expecting. I think there is some identity to some of the monsters. I think some of them,
once again, man,
decent like movement.
Once again, I don't know what he's on here. A 6 for monster design in D4? I was impressed. Okay, I can't stand behind this at all. I can't stand behind this at all. Like, here we go. We continue. Look at this. The monster identity is not bland in D4. It's insanely well done. I would say it's even better than D2 in some ways. Look at the D2. I even rated it a bit lower because they did a really good job. Every type of monster, they got different types of damage, kind of based on the theme of the monster. Something you kind of think that monsters are very iconic. They're well designed. They stand out. They have crowd controls and types of attacks that are thematic. Monsters themselves look brutal and Diablo-like in D4. Like, what more do you want from monster design and identity? Well, let's see what he has to say here. I thought that's one of the best parts of D4.
It's a little bland, though, still. I think it's insane. And I still don't quite fully
fighting different monsters feels
specifically
incredibly fun. I don't know what he's talking about.
I think monsters have done okay. Endgame,
But the truth is he doesn't have a lot to say about it, so I don't really know why he rates it so badly. I mean, a 6 is, I guess, decent, right? You would consider that decent. A 6, bleh, kind of bleh, but decent. 6 or 7 is like decent. 7's definitely decent or good, right? But if you rate something like a 6, though, it's like, how could have you done better, MrLlama? Tell me. You know, it's out of 10. Where's the 10 on this scale? Where is the 10? What would have you done to make the monsters have more thematic attacks and everything else and just be super fun and impactful to fight? Like the Elite's design, the Elite affixes are awesome in D4 as well. Like they all have different. I mean, maybe I think there's a little bit of an over reliance on explosions. I think maybe that's my my 0.5 ding is that there's just so many on death explosions and other types of explosions, but
a 7.
That's it.
I think it's a little bit.
It's literally
laggy.
it. It's such a
like
tiny
the Tree
thing.
of Whisper bounty.
And only like
stuff,
slightly
it's just
too
not
many
interesting.
explosions.
There's not really like
I don't know, maybe
a
like
shaper
one
boss
extra
or something to really
explosion.
go try and go after. The world bosses are terrible. They're just like pure sponges that are.
Okay, so he goes into bosses being kind of bad. Now let's be real here, okay? I know what he talks about Path of Exile bosses. This is where he talks about Path of Exile bosses, and he's right. He's right. You know, he's totally right. He's definitely right. Like, I think he's on the money on this one. He definitely is. That the bosses are not like crazy hard. It's not like Project Diablo 2, which is Diablo 2 mod that I play a ton, where the bosses actually offer a genuinely high level challenge. The problem though is that most players aren't looking for this kind of a challenge. But what's interesting though is that Uber Lilith does exist in Diablo 4 and he doesn't mention it once. Not only that, but in further expansions, there promise to be primevals and other things probably. And they're going to have fights that are even more interesting. And I think my comment here will age quite well. I think we'll have more interesting boss fights later on. But the Lilith boss fight is already pretty solid. There's already plenty of interesting boss fights. Some of them are just damage sponges, sure. Some of them feel pretty basic. And once you get to the end game, it does feel like bosses, kind of like in Diablo 2, oddly enough. They are kind of a joke, and they kind of fall over because you have tons of damage. But that doesn't mean that there aren't interesting boss fights. Now, what's interesting here is that Endgame has to evaluate a lot of different systems, I feel. I feel like if you just get hung up on the dynamism of the bosses, which I actually think is pretty decent in D4, it's not too good. It's not bad. Now, to be fair, he also doesn't rate Endgame terribly. So he rates it a 7. But even I think that's a little harsh for D4 because I'm going to explain why I think they did.
I do feel like going
really
around and going
compared to most ARPGs, you got to always ask yourself.
All the different.
You always got to ask yourself when you do these evaluations, compared to what? Compared to this theoretical ideal or compared to other games that already exist or its predecessors? I'm going to compare it directly to its predecessors because I think that's the most interesting. And also that's where I have the most experience. But yeah, I don't know.
Areas has still been kind of fun, and I think I'll eventually get tired of it. I think this is going to be too high for many people of a number.
He thinks it's too high of a number. Okay, I'm going to explain why it's not high enough.
But I've been enjoying my time just kind of leveling up, doing the different pieces.
I don't know, man. Like it's like with D4, he thought of in like every scenario. All right, he started with a 2 rating, and he's like, is it higher or lower? Maybe a 4 or 5, but being more generous. He's like, it's probably a 4 or 5 on everything, and if it's higher, it's like, it'll be a little higher. It's kind of suggested by the fact that he literally says there, you know, like, this might be too high for some people. What is it lacking, though? It does some of the best endgame job I've ever seen, and I kind of will explain why. I mean, I didn't rate it like 9 or anything, but close.
I have enjoyed the end game at about a 7 out of 10, I would say. The worst part right now is there's the one map that is the one dungeon that's the best place to farm experience, and so instead of going around and like unlocking more of the glyphs and whatever stuff and gaining the experience for those, we're just running the same map over and over for experience, and that's the worst part.
Yeah.
But I think if that was like not there,
yeah,
it would be much more fun. Bosses.
Okay, so before we go over his rating for bosses, which I think once again is very unfair, especially but that's even more unfair probably. Now, I didn't actually include bosses in my rating at all because I rolled it into endgame because I feel like the bosses are interesting enough to not like put them in there. I rated endgame a 4 though. Okay, so overall I just like increased the weighting of it. See, he weighted that 1.5, so it basically does the same thing. Actually, you know what? I'll change it a bit. I'll rate it like a 4.5. Okay, so let me go over to my rating on endgame, which kind of rolls over on bosses. So when he starts talking about bosses, he says they're just terrible. That's what we just started on. There is a lot of really cool systems in Diablo 4. There are a lot. I am impressed, actually. Obviously, you have the Whispers, but you also have the PvP, which is very good. I mean, that factors a little bit. I think PvP should be separate, though, as an evaluative criteria. That's fine. But the Nightmare Dungeons are actually sick. Like, think about, like, mapping or anything else, like, in the endgame to grind experience. They had some very interesting attributes. We're not just talking about generic stat boosts. That's the most typical way to handle like maps. Even in like Project Diablo 2, it's kind of lazy, right? You get some stat boosts. Maybe monsters get like some other more interesting stat boosts, and that's it. No, you get things like Lightning Storm. You get things that literally change how you play in the dungeon. Like you get things where the monsters are like resistant if you're closer up, so you have to change your playstyle to be farther back so you can actually kill them faster. It's actually really interesting, the Nightmare Dungeon system, which he doesn't really go much into, which I think is kind of sad. I mean, I realize that you might not care about some of this stuff if you're playing one of the more overpowered builds at the moment, but try playing something that maybe not quite as meta, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Like you really have to take these things into account. Helltide is just super fun. Just like going around just blasting monsters everywhere, just like demons just coming out of nowhere. Really strong demons, really weak demons. Getting currency to spend on these really cool drops that are, they have a pretty high chance of good item drops. The density makes it impactful for experience. Bossing is lacking a bit. I agree. He rolls it into a separate criteria, but it's existent, and there are interesting boss fights that I think the vast majority of players will enjoy and find challenging. The capstone bosses, the Lilith, there's Uber Lilith at the very end. I mean, it can't be that bad, guys. It really can't. The bosses have interesting attacks. A lot of them are very unique at how they attack and the kinds of attacks they do. And, kind of how they work. The world bosses are mostly damage sponges, but that's kind of what they're supposed to be. It's supposed to be something where you can get together with other players and kill them. I do think the bosses could be a bit better, but maybe in the expansions. That's some room for them to grow. I think in order to get a 10 for me at this point, like, in other words, like, the industry standard in endgame, they do probably want to have something like Shaper and PoE, though. Something like that. Definitely some capstone bosses, more of them, not just like 1 or 2 or 3. More.
I give a 3.
But he doesn't think there's any
again,
of this going on in the game.
Right here.
He weighted bosses separately. That's a 3. A 3. Okay, tell me, players of D4. All right. When you fought those capstone bosses or Lilith, did those boss fights seem boring? Or was there some element of challenge? Did it feel like you're almost dying or dying quite a bit? When you first got there. The vast majority of players are going to say yes to these. They are not easy bosses, and they're quite interesting. Also, dungeon bosses can be quite interesting too, but obviously later in the game, kind of like in D2, they kind of just become smack the pinata. I understand.
So a higher weighting means
it could be better.
More overall weight.
But if you rate this a 3, you gotta think that they're literally as bad as D2 bosses. D2 bosses are pretty much a 2 or a 3. Let's be honest, like one of the worst aspects of Diablo 2, at least D2R, that the bosses are they're very simple. Very telegraphed. If you know what you're doing with your skill, you'll never die. You know, it's pretty easy. It's pretty easy. I definitely think that is where, you know, some of the end game stuff definitely, you could definitely feel the impact. You definitely feel the impact.
Weighted rating. Right there. Stagger bar is cool. Otherwise, I think the bosses are pretty lame. I don't think the bosses have like the Diablo 2 has terrible bosses, and I think these bosses are just as bad as well. And it's sad because you see games like Path of Exile, which has amazing bosses and amazing boss fights.
See, like, I don't know, man. I don't know. I get what he's trying to say, but you know, most players can't even fight a lot of those bosses. They're pretty inaccessible. So to make that such a huge impact on the score you give the game is, I don't know. I don't know, especially when you got to take into account the rest of the end game as well. Making the bosses all overly difficult might be a problem. This should only be a thing in expansions or the very end game, which I think D4 already kind of does pretty well.
And that just did not translate over here. You know, there's
know,
maybe like the Lilith
overly
fight
harsh
kind of fun or something. You know?
Yeah, he gives a thumbs up to the Lilith fight a little bit.
But overall, I was pretty disappointed with it compared to the other modern ARPGs. I think there's a lot.
Doesn't even talk about like the capstone bosses are actually quite interesting.
Better fights,
especially the Nightmare one.
In all of those games.
Anyway,
spells, I guess.
I mean, he wants the ultra hard uber bosses in Project Diablo 2 and PoE. You know, don't get me wrong; those are fun, but it already has some of that going on, and it could definitely get better in the future. I definitely think it could. So if they improve that, I think the end game is actually incredible in this game. I think it's pretty hard to say otherwise, unless you roll trading into that. But trading, I think, is more part of the social aspect, and I don't know. It kind of depends. I definitely rate that separately though. So yeah, I definitely rate that a little bit separately. But yeah. There are some modifications to how I rate things, but for the most part, I wanted to keep it pretty similar. Yeah, so let's go. All right, so spells. He talks about spells separately. It's not that interesting, really. I mean, he mostly just says, you know, once again, I don't know if he's evaluating balance here, but I don't personally. I think the spells are very iconic and very cool looking in the game, kind of like the monsters. I think there's a solid variety. I think besides like maybe the exact look of Blight, because I'm playing it, I can see it. Some of the things make it hard to see, so some of the graphical interface maybe isn't perfect, so I would rate it like an 8.5. Overall, they look really cool. They're very well done. If you want to evaluate that separately like he did, that's what I did. All right, as you can see here, though, I've already gone down to the next one, though, which on my personal evaluation, which is social and trading. This is definitely where I feel like the game doesn't do very well, and he agrees with me. You know, that we kind of agree here. I think this is my lowest rating I give anything, though, if I remember right. Maybe I don't.
Give a 7. I don't even know where the heck I'm supposed to like find a party to play with.
So he's right. He's right. It's all outsourced. It's all third party. It's Discord. You find people in the game along the way in events. Maybe you talk to them if you want to join up with them. Maybe you add them to your party, which you could do pretty easily. So that's something they do allow you to do. I do think his rating, though, is still overly harsh, though. A 2? So what? There's no clans. There's no ability to quickly add people to your friends list and add them later on. No, those things exist in the game. They do. There's different chats too for different kinds of people you want to talk to. Yeah. I mean, they wanted to make it feel immersive. They don't want this. And well, what he's looking for here is like a 1990s, 1980s style like game lobby, like basically like D2. This is definitely a boomer complaint right here, rating it a 2. Now the reason why I rate it pretty bad, but I still rate it maybe like decent, like 4.5, 5 kind of. That's like where I'm at on it, is because I feel like that the trading isn't super impactful. And there's not a lot of allowance for that, even with third parties, and they do outsource a lot of the other functions, such as a global chat, things like that, to other platforms like Discord. And D2JSP is still king because they literally created no trade infrastructure, and there's no trading. What's interesting is that if there was trading, they could potentially also make items more rare, which once again, I do talk about often on my stream is a very toxic interaction, is when you make a lot of items untradeable by necessity, you also have to make the item drop system less interesting or less of a dopamine hit, simply because the items are, they're just not they're just not as interesting to find. They can't be because they have to be more common by necessity because it's basically solo self-found. So they're forcing solo self-found on the itemization, the item drop system. That's part of the issue here. Definitely my lowest ratings on Diablo 4 are all things to do with items and trading. I definitely think this is not the most ideal system. The most ideal system to me, even if it makes botting a thing, that's not a problem for me. They should just moderate that if they want to. And it doesn't bother me that other people would RMT items. I mean, they could do that with rares anyway, so what's the point? The rares are the most important things. You can always slap on an aspect after the fact. So I really don't even really get that, honestly. They should just allow free trade. Free trade is fun in ARPGs. It really is.
If I didn't have friends, where am I supposed to find people to play with? There's no.
Yeah, so he talks about how he has to outsource it a bit, but you can find them all the way throughout the world. So I think he's just forgetting or just not giving any credit to the systems they do have in place, which they have a few. They do.
Lobby screen.
They have good systems, some decent systems. You can't rate it this badly. Like a 2 suggests they didn't even try. Like this is a horrible social experience. And not that bad.
I'm so confused.
That's what I would rate it to.
Because at least in D2, I could I'm looking at games from a lobby screen. I can
see. The thing is that it's an open world, so you don't need separate games. You could just go to that place in the world, MrLlama. This is a boomer complaint, right? This has nothing to do with the game being bad.
To just go off site to a third-party site.
He's right about that. So let's talk about this here, okay? No in-game trading systems outsource trading, so D2JSP is king for whatever trading does exist or any services. I looked on D2JSP, it's doing quite fine. No other outstanding issues. It even has a clan system, so it has no issues with the chats necessarily. It's not like there's any issues, it's just what it doesn't have is the problem. The systems it has are good, and it brings up the number. I think it has some pretty solid systems for social and trading. The problem is that for some reason they're limited and they're outsourced in a lot of cases. I don't really get the point of this. I don't think it helps. I think there'll be botting anyway because people will just bot. They'll have bots run obols. They'll just literally AFK in an event practically, and then go and vendor, some gamble vendor items. I mean, it's the same stuff. If you're gonna allow rares to be traded, there's no reason not to have this. So to me, this is a bad thing that this exists in the game. And the waiting isn't horrible because sometimes finding things yourself or having some things that you have to find yourself is not bad because it gives you more of a feeling of accomplishment within the game itself. And it adds to the immersion and makes it to where you're not playing Trade Simulator all day. So I do get some of the pros to a D4 system. That people don't want to play Trade Simulator, people want to play the game. But So I would even say, if anything, my evaluation might be even slightly harsher. I mean, it might be. You could put it up a little bit if you wanted to. Put it at 5.5. Um, because there are some advantages to how they have these systems structured. I think I'm actually going to bring it up a bit because when I think about it, like it is decent. It's not. I put when I put a 4, I'd say 4 is kind of bad. It's kind of trash, and then 2 is really trash. But he says it's really trash. I don't know. I don't know. The trading exists, kind of. I definitely can't give this a good rating in good faith though, without more improvements and more opening of systems. I don't think it's horrible though. I really don't. I really think it's not horrible.
Because I don't. Let's bounce back and forth, have fun. Um, I think
Okay,
it's been
so
really fun. The worst part about party play is that we can't trade.
yeah, so once again, it goes back to trading with party play, but joining up in a party in Diablo 4 is insanely fun. So I actually agree with his rating here. I don't have any problems with his evaluation of that particular aspect of the game whatsoever. That's a 9. That's easy. The buffs feel really fun. It feels fun to play in it. The bonuses maybe are a little too powerful, but they're mostly pretty solid, encouraging party play. It's a really fun game to play with your friends, couch co-op, super solid. He recognizes this, and I think he recognizes that compared to a lot of games, it's gonna feel really fun to play in a party. They definitely wanted to nail this in D4, and I think they did a great job. So good on Mr. Llama, not giving an unreasonable rating there.
Or give each other I'm
Something
issues for
that's, you
balance
know,
damage has
even like a 7 there would be unreasonable to me because it's like better than what's better. You got to compare it to something, and that's a lot of the problems with a lot of these ratings here. All right, so oh man, this has got to be the most asinine thing I remember watching. Oh my goodness. And I still don't get this because in Diablo 4, they literally allow you to turn it off. They allow you to turn it off. Okay, I'm gonna go on a bit of a rant here. This is I have to. I have to because this actually frustrates me. This is another thing. This is kind of one of the some of these more frustrating aspects is because one of the reasons why I felt like I had to make a video like this because it's like people I feel are getting hyper fixated on just really dumb crap. Like like they weight this a 2 and they gave it a 2. He gave it a 2 and weighted it a 2. Like, yeah, it's gonna bring down your overall rating. It's gonna make you think the game is not that good. A 6 is a trash rating. Go to the end, man. He thinks it's a 6. Okay? A 6. You see where my rating's at? It's almost 2 whole points higher. That's a big difference. But it's because I think I actually evaluated things more fairly. He just didn't evaluate things very fairly at all. I think this is a game that is worth the money, and if you write something at 6, I'd say, well, with that box price, I wouldn't buy that. It's a big difference in what he's communicating to the community is, once again, like unintentionally or intentionally, he's kind of pandering to the people that didn't want to like it from the beginning. The people that maybe don't have the money or didn't want to spend the money because they'd rather eat a steak dinner, a single steak dinner. I don't know what it is. But when it comes down to it, it's a massive game with a ton to offer, at all points in the game. And you got people trying to nitpick it down to justify why they already hated it before it even came out. And I don't know if he realizes that's what he's doing to some extent, but MrLlama is kind of doing this, and it's tragic, honestly, because I feel like a lot of people are gonna miss out on some good experiences because they're jaded from Diablo 3. They're too close-minded. They're too stuck in this narrow mindset. And when it comes down to it, when you see his rating of damage scaling, you can really see this jaded mindset really come in.
They said they were going to really focus on this, and then it still is already scaling. And now we're just going to have season 1, season 2, season 3, season 4, all of these things, and power creep always enters in these games. And I'm just super worried for when we're just going to get crazy Diablo 3 numbers again.
So This is okay. So it's like he gives them no credit here. All right. Diablo 3 numbers. This rating is based purely on speculation. So how can you rate something as it is based on speculation? I don't do that at all. I recognize there's room for things to grow, which is why the numbers can get higher in most cases, or lower if they decide to make the game too easy and too brain dead, just like in Diablo 3. They can go down. But I don't speculate on whether that's going to happen. I rate things as they are, as it should be. That is fair evaluation. I try to be very careful, and I feel like a lot of his ratings here are just not careful at all. There, I don't know what they are. It's not good. So a lot of things were hot. He mentioned this, but it was hot fixed. There are no billions of damage in the game. The damage numbers are actually kind of reasonable. In Diablo 2, you can do hundreds of thousands of damage with certain attacks. You can also do that in Diablo 4. I mean, you could probably do some millions of damage as well in Diablo 4 once you get to the end game and fix it as well. But here's the thing, guys. Here's the thing. One, in Diablo 4, it's possible to turn off the numbers. You don't even have to see them. You don't even have to see them. Now, once again, people judging the book by its cover and checking out them damage numbers and being turned off because the UI and it looks like D3. Okay, here we go. This is no. You gotta be fair, man. I'm a D3 hater, and I don't care what it looks like. Okay, the game has very different systems and the way it feels. That matters a lot. There's a lot. He really goes off here on the size of the numbers. Let's talk about that for a little bit. Let's talk about that for a little bit. So Diablo 2 has 3 difficulties, right? And the numbers pretty much scale from like 1 to 2 to like 200,000. Diablo 4, we got damage that starts pretty much the same. 1 to 2, maybe like 14 to 16. I don't know. Starts out pretty weak damage. In the very beginning, you're not doing much damage at all. It's like somewhere between like 1 to 10 damage, just like in Diablo 2. And there are 4 difficulties. Well, obviously, the first 2 being kind of the same difficulty. But if you think about it, there's also 100 levels. And is it really that much worse that a build could do a couple million damage? Really? Really? Is it really that different? You got all this difficulty, you got a lot more content in the game, you got a lot more bosses that you have to scale up, especially if you want to create a lot more content for both casuals and expert players alike, which it seems like they're doing with the Nightmare Dungeons and some of the bosses. How can you do that without slightly bigger numbers? Which the answer is you can't. It's impossible. So what more could they improve there? They can't. Period. So when I evaluate this, I gotta think there's nothing particularly wrong with this. Yeah, maybe it's a little too high, but it's not much of a factor either. I even lowered the weighting on it because it's like you could turn them off. It's just a number. The attack power number isn't that high in your character screen. Looks pretty similar to a Diablo 2 number to me. I don't know what people want. I say difficulty 1 here. It's got 4 difficulties. It's got 3 to 4 difficulties depending on how you see it. So it's even got maybe a half more of a difficulty. Now, I do admit, the reason why I don't rate it higher than a 7, okay, because I did think they did a pretty good job, is that there are, maybe maybe some of the damage multipliers are too high. They're not that much too high. So again, it's not that big of a deal. And this is a huge. Look at that, man.
Monetization.
A 2, man.
I'm giving a 4. It's it still is already scaling. And now we're just gonna have season 1, season 2, season.
So then once again, speculating about, power creep. I mean, yeah, power creep might happen, but here's the thing: like, you could turn the numbers off. You might have some of that, but it's inevitable. So why is this even a thing? I weighted it at 1, but honestly, it should be weighted at 0. 0.5 at best.
Season 3,
if
season
we're being
4, all of these things.
realistic
and
here.
Power creep to win. They have worked hard to make it.
All right.
I'm giving.
This is another thing that really irks me. Man, I just can't do this. All right, community. All right, Diablo community. All right. Let's be real here, okay? If you've made it all the way to this point, my review of his review, we're gonna have a real talk about this, okay? We're gonna have a real talk here. We're gonna have a real talk. So, okay. So, I have a question that I put forward to the community. This is an open forum. Pay to win is bad, right? I don't think anybody, any core gamer, anyone that, likes games for the full immersive experience of getting away from the real world, getting away from the issues and the struggles of the real world, which of course includes or is dominated by real money and real currency, likes any kinds of things where the game forces you to spend money to get good at the game or to gain meaningful progress because it's either so absurdly difficult otherwise or just super annoying otherwise, or and makes it in such a way that it could even be predatory where you're not even guaranteed progress in the game because it's some kind of gotcha system. Nobody likes that stuff. Nobody likes it. But you want to know something? If you're going to create a massive game and you're going to put a ton of developer hours into it, and you're going to continue to develop that game through the, throughout the game, throughout the life of the game, what do you expect? You have to monetize it some other way. I think Diablo 4 monetized it in the best way almost it possibly could. Yeah, some things are a little over monetized. That's why I don't give it a 10. But a 4 suggests they are monetizing it badly, or it's at least on the edge of bad and decent. I totally disagree. And let's listen to what he has to say though first, and then I'm gonna go into more of my own thoughts here.
They have worked hard to make it not pay to win.
They have.
Cosmetics seem overpriced
but there's
for a full price
there's a
game.
way you have to do it.
The battle pass in general, the separate currency to buy, the bundles. I'm actually going to a 3. The more I talk through it.
Where do you think you're paying all these developers from? You want them to go hungry? I mean, you either have pay to win or you don't in these massive games. These games are so big nowadays and they have so much going on for it. What do you expect? Of course they're going to need to have a lot of cosmetics. Of course you are. Of course you're going to have maybe something like cosmetics in a battle pass. That, if you don't want pay to win in your game, how do you think that we don't get it? This is how we don't get pay to win in the game. This is how it doesn't happen. Look, the way you don't get pay to win in the game is simple. You pay more for the box price. Straight up. With inflation, $70 to $100, when it was $50 literally 30 years ago, 25 years ago is not unreasonable, especially with these games being so massive. It is not unreasonable if you want the game to have a continued lifespan to sell cosmetics in 50 different ways. It's not. And they don't harm the game experience at all. Heck, they even prevented, to some extent, some real money trading. even on third-party sites by making not everything tradable. What more do you want? What more do you want? Yeah, everything's still a self-found, but I don't think people would like that necessarily. What more do you want? Like, if you want them to continue development of the game, if you want them to produce games like this, you got to support Blizzard or other game companies when they make a game that doesn't have that pay-to-win garbage in it. Doesn't have the stupid convenience, pay for convenience, pay for not being annoyed garbage in Lost Ark, They don't have the... They don't have, gotcha systems like in Diablo Immortal. They don't have just straight buying power, like these experience boosts and other things in the game, or loot boxes, or blah, 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 that will make you stronger or affect the game experience. Look, if you don't want that stuff in your game, you need to support the game companies when they do it like how Diablo 4 did it. You don't give them a rating of 3 or 4. That's not how you do it. This is not supporting them when they make the right move. This is just, this is definitely just another reason why I had to make this video. Definitely. This is ideally how you want the game to be monetized. I do agree, though, that maybe there's a bit too much with the cosmetics going on. Maybe they go a bit overboard, sure. Maybe they're maybe a little too expensive. But they'll probably figure that out with the life of the game. Monetization. This is still ideally how you want the game to be monetized, though. It really is. Like, if you're going to make a game like this is ideal. Ideal, man. What do you want, man? I don't understand. I even think I could give it a 9, honestly, but, I'll admit that there are, people might be turned off by how many dollar signs there are in the game. But this is, once again, all cover and no book.
A lot of that stuff. And this is all within a full price boost. My character...
Well, he's right. Even the free cosmetics and the transmogs look amazing, so I don't have anything to say. This is what he says here.
And overall, I'm giving an...
He's really good. He's really good. I do the same thing. We'll go down. I have nothing to say about this. I actually think the looks in your character look in game and the looks of the items are actually pretty incredible, even the free ones. So why would you complain about monetization of other cosmetics when the free ones look so good already? Once again, contradictory. Just don't get it, man. Don't get it. Alright. Gotta call out what I gotta call out, man.
8.
Always gonna be real with you guys.
Some spells bring it down a little bit. I think the game looks really amazing in some spots.
So, even though he gave this a really high rating, I still think this is pretty low. Like, they made the game... So many people were worried about the game not feeling dark and Diablo-like. It felt amazingly dark and Diablo-like. The environments are incredible. It's dark, brutal, and the environments are just insane. The identity is near perfect. Probably ding it for 0.5 for the reasons he mentioned. Like, some of the spells maybe could be improved to have a bit more visibility. But most of them don't have that issue at all. The vast majority. So yeah, no. Absolutely not. I would give it almost a 10. So once again, even an 8 here, I think, is a harsh evaluation. Now, to be fair, not most Diablo 2 gamers aren't super graphic gamers, really. Obviously, with D2R, though, people don't mind those graphics, right? And they also don't mind when PD2 upgrades their graphics. So I think people got to be a bit more real with themselves, too. The graphics do matter because it's the full immersion experience.
When I go to, like, the Tree of Whispers and things, I'm like, oh my god, this is 10 out of 10.
Yeah, well, most of it is 10 out of 10, so why give it an 8? I don't know.
Which maybe that's what they're going for.
It's incredible. Like, it's really good for a Diablo game. This is just... I don't even know what the heck is going at here. This is a kind of a random thing. I guess I added this rating myself just to have it, but you could leave this off of a fair evaluation, I think. And that could be said for a few things for sure here. Or they could be rolled into other ones. Because there's some redundancy here in his ratings. I leave some of it in myself, but that's because you could just weight it higher, right? It just gives it a higher rating, essentially, a higher weighting,
somehow,
which is fun.
But I'm still having fun, especially.
I don't know what he's on about here, really. I really don't know what he's on about. What's missing? There might be some things missing, but once again, overly harsh rating. He'd rate it about 1 lower than I would. I just don't see it. Like, it's got a lot of fun, meaningful interactions between player, monster, and items and skills. And overall, it's just a very entertaining experience. I would say that he's right that there might be a couple things maybe missing, but that seems to be expansion material. So, I rate what I can see, right? And what I can see is a really good entertainment experience, which is an 8.
Especially because I'm playing in a group, I'm still enjoying going around. The completionist in me really is wanting to continue doing things.
See, completionism is fun in this game. All right.
There's been a few bugs where
So I actually, oddly enough, rated a little bit lower in performance, but not a lot lower, because he's right. The performance overall has been pretty good. But when the game was actually launched, the servers had some major issues. The servers also had some other major issues as well. When certain updates came through as well. So it wasn't clean. The client has a major memory leak sometimes, which affects your ability to stream it, which means you have to restart the client just to get it to work properly. So it's not perfect, and there are some laggy thingies here and there. There's some bugs like falling through the ground. I think 9.5 is actually too high. This is actually maybe one of the few ratings I decidedly give lower than his ratings. So here I rate it performance an 8. Overall it performs smoothly, and most of the time you can log in. The vast majority of the time, just not always. So I don't know. It's not perfect, but to be fair, compared to most launches, that would be probably rated somewhere between a 1 and a 6. Pretty dang good. Let's be real here.
Where I fell through the ground.
Most AAA launches, you gotta think about this. Way more buggy, way more performance issues, way more server issues. Yeah, I think it's pretty decent.
Is off to put the barrier back on, and
I think maybe he didn't see some of the issues I've seen them, but who knows?
That to me doesn't.
Also, I think the video might have been made just after launch or just before it.
Doesn't feel amazing. I don't.
When he made it anyway.
Additionally, when I was playing through the game, through the campaign.
All right, so here
I was always out of resources.
He's talking about resources.
Oh my god, I hate.
So I agree that the resource skill interaction is maybe a bit harsh, but not that bad. Because see, you want to encourage people to use, not just spam one ability, which is what they're trying to do with their cooldowns and resources and their skill interaction. They're trying to encourage the use of tons of different abilities in the game. That is literally what they're trying to accomplish. That's why there's only 6 buttons on the bar. It's so that if there was 10 buttons, then every build would look exactly the same. Instead, they're trying to make it to where you actually have to think, do you want this skill versus this skill? Do you want to use only, and to where you actually have to use all 6 buttons instead of just spamming one button. It just makes it a lot more interactive. So when people rate this thing terribly, as they did in the beta as well, I've seen a lot of other videos in the beta about this. I think this is very unfair because it really does not take into account the alternative. The alternative is that you basically have spammy one-note builds that are always the same. And you also just have a lot more of a less dynamic experience. Resource management isn't much of a problem in the end game, by the way. So, like Diablo 2, it's kind of similar. You know, I need mana, not enough mana. I need mana. That's literally your life as a sorceress early game on Diablo 2. So, why he's complaining about this as a Diablo 2 player, so to the extent that he is, giving it a 3. I actually increased the weighting on mine. I actually gave it a weight of 1.5 because I think it matters somewhat. I didn't rate it insanely high, but I do think that the way they did it has a lot of pros that I think a lot of people are missing. But yeah, the resource generation does feel a little harsh early on, though. Maybe even more harsh than Diablo 2, though. So yeah, they could improve that a bit. I think there is room for improvement here. Absolutely. I definitely would not give it as harsh of a rating as he did, though, because once again, it's about making it to where you can't just spam one ability, which is the problem with a lot of modern ARPGs. So you don't want it to be quite that bad. It's a very careful balance. I could rate this a little bit higher, but I'll leave it alone. Okay, next on the list, developer communication. Well, it's pretty straightforward. The developers, you can almost rate this a 10. They've been very clear and about their communication, constantly doing interviews and talking about the game. There's some things that they're not always, obviously they're hiding a lot, but that's normal in any kind of thing. Mr. Llama talks about this like briefly, but honestly it's not very interesting. It's got a weight of 1 for a reason, but it just means that the overall production of the game has been fine. Here's another thing that I think he overrates a little bit. Yeah, this is kind of a joke, but yeah, see, they're willing to listen, they share their knowledge, blah, blah, blah. The horse, I like how he gives us a separate rating. Now, he gives it a weight of 1, to be fair, but he rates it at 10. So, kind of a meme. I love the horse too. Let's be real. You know, it's pretty fun. But I don't rate it a 10 because it dies way too fast, man. It can't even jump over those small rock walls and those barricades and skeletons make. He just gets stuck and trapped in walls all the time. Heck, look at the horse in the original like Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. They can jump over this giant wall. This horse is this tiny little like kiddie pool wall that can't even jump over the wall. Like, come on, man. Now I can jump over these like small chasms, which I think is cool. But I honestly think there's some functionality maybe they're missing out on here with the horse still. I think there's some room for improvement. Kind of funny though when he talks about it.
It's so dumb, but for some reason, this is one of my favorite parts of the game. Is just hopping on the horse and like rushing over to.
I definitely don't. It's actually really fun. It's a really fun aspect of the game, and I think it really brings the open world together. I think it's really good. They also don't give it to players instantly, so they can feel the power spike of getting the horse. I kind of like that. It's definitely something that I really like about like itemization in Diablo 2 in general, is that you feel these enormous power spikes. When you get an Enigma or an Infinity, it feels impactful. Well, it feels impactful to get the horse. And that's why itemization is rated lower, because, you know, not everything feels like it's super impactful necessarily to either find or use. At least not yet. So, once again, the game-changing experiences definitely can use a bit more of those to get out of the 5 zone and more into the 10 zone. But still, as you can see, it's not bad.
Shrine or something. And without like any time whatsoever.
So this is when he goes on a rant about the Paragon board.
You can very quickly just optimize it because it's so.
So he's right. You can, according to a very specific build, you can optimize it pretty well, as long as you realize like what kind of nodes you should prioritize. The problem, though, is that there's a lot of customization here that is totally missing, in terms of course, allowing it to be build enabling, the Paragon boards themselves. And then you know, he complains earlier in this video about things being too complex, and now here he's like, well, it's obvious what to do with the paragon. Well, which is it, man? Which is it? I don't know, man, but all I know is that I think they did a pretty good job of balancing the simple and complex aspects.
Simple. Again, it has almost an illusion of
Enough to where a lot of players are kind of overwhelmed initially to where they need to ask me questions about it. And then, of course, enough to where now people say illusion of choice. Well, yeah, within 1 out of 100 builds, 100, 200 builds. If there's 200 functional builds in your game, yeah, and within a build, there's going to be an illusion of choice. Diablo 2, there's an illusion of choice. Yeah, let's talk about that buzzword for a second, illusion of choice. I've seen this a lot in a lot of videos and comment sections. All right, yeah, sure. But when you can choose between 150 different builds within a build, out of 200 builds, there's always going to be illusion of choice in the end game. I mean, look at Diablo 2. Shaco, Enigma, Hodo, Spirit. That's like 50% of the builds. I want to talk about illusion of choice. There you go. You know, they give you the illusion of choice to where you can like put points and everything on the tree, but you end up just maxing out almost like just 4 or 5 skills, literally on every skill tree in Diablo 2 to max out the build. Illusion of choice. Well, there's a lot more choice here than illusion, at least than in other ARPGs I can compare it to, including my beloved Diablo 2 and D2R. So if that's something you really want to get focused on, let's think about some other games. Some games don't give you any choice at all, nonetheless an illusion. Think about Diablo 3. Everything's literally just handed to you, including the skills that you literally just assign to your bar. You want to talk about illusion of choice?
I can already tell that I'll be your best friend in this forsaken camp.
With that, we got to follow. Let's do this. I'm actually not even live right now, so that's interesting. But yeah, so like illusion of choice. Where's the choice in some of those games? There's no choice at all. Now, to be fair, I think I know what he's thinking about in his head. All right, he's thinking about Path of Exile. It's pretty telegraphed, but like Path of Exile, you need a PhD to play it. So, do you want the game to be accessible? Well, you gotta balance out accessibility, right? See, they do a pretty good balancing act in D4. This is something that no one's given them credit for. There is enough simplicity and complexity to where different players can enjoy it. The Nightmare Dungeons also offer a layer of complexity. You really gotta think about if your build can even run that dungeon well, you know? Or is it going to slow you down or kill you enough times to where you can't even finish it? You don't know.
To it. So much better if these, first off, didn't just give stats, but
now
actually gave like other things that mattered, other apps.
So he wants there to not be things that matter, but they do matter. That's the thing, is the white nodes matter on the Paragon board. They matter. Look, have you ever put a glyph into the sockets before? Bro, you need certain amounts of stats. You need to even like make the rare nodes effective. You need certain amounts of stats around the glyphs to make them effective. They do something. He gives it a 5. Another very overly harsh critique by a mile. I even weighted it higher because I think the end game stat system kind of gives it's kind of a bit of a throwback to Diablo 2 when statting your character was a thing. It's like a so much more interactive stat system than D2s could have ever hoped to be. It's a very interactive statting system. Basically advanced game stats where grinding in the end game can impact the stats themselves as well. It's really, really good. I think it really allows for a lot of customization, especially between softcore and hardcore, focusing on defensive and offensive stats. It's not super telegraphed, but at the same time, it's also not insanely hard to understand once you get into it. I think they're pretty great. I think maybe, some aspects of it could be a little bit more interesting and maybe a little bit more obvious in the UI so players can understand. The UI is kind of weird. It kind of has you like going between boards instead of just being able to like, select different boards and look at them. I don't know. It's kind of strange. But besides that, like, yeah, I don't get what he's on about here. Like, it's actually really good. Like, the system is very dynamic. What would you do better to not either make it overcomplicated or to make it, simple but also boring that doesn't require, any kind of meaningful progress that you feel in the end game? I don't know. Like, they did a really good job, I think. And I think if you want to be fair with yourself, you got to recognize that.
I could do this. It's okay. And lastly,
and he just talks about crafting and he says it's okay. I mean, that's pretty much what he said. So there's not like crafted items like in Diablo 2, which is one reason why I ding it. He gives it a 5 though. I actually think the enchanting system is pretty cool, but it also is fair. It makes finding the items impactful because you can only change one stat, but it also makes the crafting feel impactful as well. The only reason why I ding it is because I feel like there could be another item type. I feel like there's a missed opportunity to maybe make crafted items that are hard to roll good stats, but if you can, they could actually roll even better stats than the items that you can find. So kind of like Diablo 2, whereas crafting is not mandatory. Crafting a separate item type is not mandatory, but it can feel very good to do so if you craft hundreds of them. I think that'd be pretty cool. Kind of a missed opportunity there. But yeah, I think the systems they have with the aspect and printing and the enchants and even the sigil creation and whatnot systems, while not allowing you to over customize them, is actually pretty good. I do feel like maybe they drop too frequently in the end game to the point where you almost never need to craft them. But that's more of a balance issue that they might figure out later on. I don't know. I don't think that bad of a rating is bad.
Systems, I am giving
now
a 5
he
as
talks
well.
about how
like
it copied a lot of other game systems like Diablo 3.
They just played it safe with systems. I feel like they copied a lot from Diablo 3, from Diablo Immortal. They just didn't take chances, right? Even like the crafting is a great example. It's like it's a simple, basic system.
Yeah, so this I kind of do agree with them, but I also think that you also have to take into account how well the systems work together. A lot of systems seem very disjointed in a lot of games, and a lot of systems feel useless. You don't feel that with Diablo 4 at all. There are no useless systems, and there's no useless things you would just never do. Everything, there's so much variety, and there's also always a feeling like you're getting some kind of impact from every system in the game. So I can't in good faith rate it as just decent because the vast majority of games really struggle with this. However, I also don't rate it insanely high because, as he mentions, there are some copied systems, and some of them lack originality. I think that's really the main problem, is that some of them are very original. Like, I'd say their Paragon boards, their skill tree, the way they do nightmare dungeons are quite original, which once again is why I rate it pretty high. However, even their ladder system is original. It's not infinite Paragon like in D3. So I think when he's thinking about things that copy D3, he's probably mostly just thinking about the crafting systems or the lack of the item depth. But Diablo 3 item depth is so much worse. So he talks about this a bit.
Totally fine.
We'll let him cook a bit here.
They didn't take a chance. They didn't try and
create a new system. And then I'm going to very briefly go over my rating systems for the predecessors
all of those
and show you guys where I'm coming from.
How items get
You
built,
guys can decide for yourself
works,
if my evaluation was fairer than his. Let me know in the comments below.
How salvaging works, how any and all of those things exist. There's just not a ton of innovation.
I mean, there is innovation. I mentioned 3 things a second ago. It's just not some of the things you might have liked there to be more innovation, and maybe there could be more. I admit there could be more innovation, and that is why it's not a 10, it's a 7 or 7.5. But there is a decent amount of solid innovation that's actually making the end game pop a lot more than a lot of end games that I've seen personally.
Within the game.
So yeah, is that simple?
It makes it feel a little bit mid.
Okay.
So that is the overall ratings for each and every different, and then we have the final rating for Diablo 4.
6.1.
I think that honestly is fair rating for.
It's not. It's not. You know, this is not giving the developers credit for a lot of the things they did extremely well. And the balancing acts that they performed, the trapeze acts, they performed pretty well at all. So you compare his rating to mine, that's literally a 1.6 difference. That's pretty significant. I mean, when you look on a game review website, which, you know, those are usually overly positive, right? Especially when a big AAA game comes out like this, because, you know, they kind of got to toe the line to some extent. But I want to explain something, you know. Throughout this whole rating process, I am not a Diablo partner. I believe MrLlama is a Diablo partner. I believe that is the case. I didn't have special endgame access. I just played through the game. All right. I mean, I bought the Ultimate Edition so I could play the betas. Yeah, we did that. I don't have those potential biases that could be associated with that. Some people might think that I'm paid to play it to some extent because I'm a Diablo partner. I'm actually not. I'm not associated with this. This is just my own untarnished opinion that I can give here. I have none of those associations. I don't even get billions of viewers currently playing the game. If anything, it's less than Diablo 2. I'm just going to be real here. This is how real I am. I'll tell you guys everything. You know, it's less for sure. And I'm not going to let any of that color my evaluation of this game. Because none of that matters. I just have to be real with you guys. As a Diablo 2 purist, someone that absolutely loves Diablo 2, I really like this game. I think it's worth the money. I really do. This is the same rating I gave it in beta. I said it was a 7.5 to an 8 out of 10 in my beta video that I made, where I evaluated systems in the beta. It's still there, pretty much, in the same spot, and playing all the way through the game. And that's evaluating a lot more criteria. And I think they just did a really good job. I really do think they did. I think if you see a rating of a 6 versus a rating close to an 8 on a game review website, that is a pretty big difference that will maybe change how you evaluate whether you should purchase the game. I'm not a paid shill. I'm not a shill at all. I'm just going to tell you, I enjoyed the game genuinely as a Diablo 2 player. I think it's so much better than Diablo 3 ever was. I am a Diablo 3 hater, and I'll show you guys why I'm a hater. You know, I'll break down exactly why I'm a hater here in a moment. But yeah, I mean, there's some things, you know, I'm not always totally on board with things like shared loot and things, or you know, individualized loot, you know, but it doesn't take away from the game experience too much. Not really. But as you can see, the things that I evaluate lower, I think, are fair evaluations because they didn't do horrible on these systems. There is a game that did, but we'll go to that in a second. And yeah, it's you just got to evaluate it contextually within the context. I hope you guys think that my rating is fair here. I really do. But I had to react to this video because I feel like I had to set the record straight. And the face of Diablo 2, you know, I don't know how many people are going to view this, but the face of Diablo 2 telling people basically that the game is not very good, which is what a 6 would mean on a website. Not very good, I think, is what most people would associate with a 6, versus like closer to an 8, which is, you know, a solid game with room to grow. I think that's the correct message here.
Boosted that much.
Once again, you know, it's like he said, you can have your own opinion, but if you break it down like I did, I think you can see that this is overly harsh. I really think it is. And I hope the Diablo 2 community can recognize that this game is not really that bad. If you can't, though, it's fine. If you don't want to buy it, it's fine. If you can't afford it, that's even more fun because not everyone can. But I think you have to be honest with yourself as well. Very important.
What do I give D2 and D3? I mean, I love D2. So
Do you just didn't want to play it from the get-go? You just want to stay addicted to D2. You don't want something to compete with your game. You don't want viewers or playtime or other players to be drained from your servers in your preferred game. You just got to be honest with yourself. If that's what you're afraid of and that's why you're shit posting all over the internet about your game, I mean, just got to be honest, dude.
I'm definitely gonna have it higher.
I feel like
D3
most people
is
are
probably
not
lower than this.
I'm not saying Mr. Llama is not being honest here.
Do the same rating.
The man behind my cam here, but I think some of these ratings, I don't think he's being fully honest with himself, maybe, or he's either not using proper comparisons with other games. Like he's not asking himself compared to what in a lot of these cases, which is I think a very important question. And he's also, I don't know, some of it's just asinine.
Right. And this
you're just looking for reasons to hate it.
Opinion. Again,
jaded reasons, which a lot of other people are doing in this community.
10 out of 10 for you, and that's totally fine. You could hate this game, and it could be a 2 out of 10.
This is where he's got his fair conclusion. I don't have any problems with what he says here.
If they improve the damage scaling. And if they improve...
He's right. If you improve some of these, it could be a lot better. So that's pretty much it for this video, though. That's pretty much it for this video. So now what we're going to do is we're going to compare it to what I think about D3 and then D2R. So let's go over D2R first, all right? This is my bias as a Diablo 2 player showing. But one thing you really want to make sure is nostalgia is also not covering... Games always felt a bit more new, especially like if it was one of your first computer games ever as a kid. It's hard to get that feeling back. You really have to gotta have that introspection, I studied a lot of psych in school. You really gotta have that introspection and think, all right, why am I thinking a certain way about this? Is it because I have this overly positive view of it, or is it because it's objectively good? So let's use the same ratings. A lot of people in MrLlama's video were actually looking for something like this. So let's do it. The campaign story, I actually did not think was as amazing in Diablo 2. I really don't. I just don't think it was. I think it was a lot more simplistic, didn't have as many cinematics to go with it, wasn't as developed. But it was solid, and it got the point across. So I also can't give it a bad rating. The music in Diablo 2, I think most people would agree that all of the music is very iconic. But you know what's interesting is there's no boss fight music at all. It's almost as if you're kind of in a void. But it's not about the boss fight music in this game. It's just the music in general. It was just very iconic, really well done. It really gave the environment a very popped out feeling. D4 did a decent job, I felt like, especially more so maybe with the boss music. And the environments were good too, but maybe some of it wasn't quite as iconic and didn't you'll always remember Diablo 2 music if you play this game. I don't know if Diablo 4 music, if that would be the same way. I think I'm being objective here. It could be a little bit of nostalgia. I don't know. Campaign, because music's one of those things that's very much connected to the limbic emotional centers of your brain, so it's tough to remove the bias or even to think about what the bias could have been or be mindful of your bias. Everyone's biased. It's just important that you're mindful of the bias while you're making evaluations. Campaign playthrough. Playthrough was simple. It was great. Not overly dialogued. It just made you feel like you were just playing the game. I don't really mind the way D4 did it, though, because it spaced it out in such a way that wasn't just constant meat grinding fest that you're already doing in the late game anyway. So why have it be the same way in the early game as the late game is beyond me. But I still recognize how Diablo 2 did it is a very solid way to do it. Itemization. So this is where Diablo 2 was just so good. It was just so good. Itemization, you get an Enigma or an Infinity that you could feel the power spike. It transformed your game experience. It just gave you such a high finding the items because they were so rare to get these items. I doubt Diablo 4 has anything like this currently, and I don't know if it will. I really hope it will, because a lot of the addiction and a lot of the just the addictive qualities of Diablo 2 that keep you kind of trapped in this end game consistently are it is really all about the it's all about the fact that you struggle throughout a lot of the game, and that spike that you get of ascending above that struggle, you can feel it. It's visceral. The game feels, it sucks you in every time you find one of those items. It's just amazing. And D4 does not feel that way, and there's an objective reason why this is the case. It's because the items just aren't as rare. It's that simple. So it has to do with item rarity, which item drop system. Once again, having those ultra rare items is really key, and having the drop system be spaced out in such a way to make higher tiers of items more rare. Diablo 2 just did it so well. It did it so well. I've never seen a better item drop system than a Diablo 2 ever. And I'm talking like any ARPG. This is why I give it a flat 10. Like, there are some 10s on here. Like, there's more 10s or close to 10s than on D4. I recognize this. The itemization, the only reason why I deem the itemization at all in Diablo 2 is, the build customization of itemization is not bad, but a lot of builds feel like you're using the same cookie cutter items over and over again. Maybe even more so than D4 slightly. That's really the only ding for D2, but like the impact of the items and the stats on the items and how the items work just feels really high. It's just a really high impact of all those things in the game. And this is why people to this day are so addicted to this game, is really those two things too there in Diablo 2. The combat mechanics, I would say, are maybe even a bit better in D2 because it's a little bit even more slowed down, but also the feeling of teleporting, getting Enigma and things like that, and interweaving teleport with skills is incredible. I think Diablo 2 has that solid, but D4 has its own very solid brand of combat mechanics. I would say D2 edges it out maybe at slightly. Class identity. Every class just felt very different with very different abilities that didn't do all the same thing. I would say even more so though than in D4, we're going to see a pretty big increase there. I'm going to kind of switch between the two to kind of show you guys like the difference. Build diversity 7.5. I actually think there's more build diversity than in Diablo 2 in the endgame. Not because of balance, but just because there's more available builds I think you can actually go for slightly. I think the Paragon and whatnot really opens it up quite a bit. 100% completionism. So if you want to get all the unique items in the game and sets, it's called a Holy Grail in Diablo 2. That's probably the closest you can get to 100% completionism in this game, but it feels incredible because of the rarity and difficulty of it. But I do think Diablo 4 does it better in that it's a lot more accessible for a lot more players than something like a Holy Grail in D2. And you really do, it really is fun to get 100% renown in Diablo 4. So I do think there's some things in Diablo 4 they actually do a bit better, actually. You can see that here. You can see that as they go down. Cinematics, it's a Blizzard game. They're always solid. And in D2R, they made them pretty incredible. The PvP, I actually think D4 PvP with all the extra systems layered on top and the encouragement of it is better. But some of the mechanic systems in D2 are also better. And the balance obviously isn't being evaluated here, but probably needs more work in D4. That being said, I think Diablo 4 will finally bring PvP back to the franchise solidly. But it was really, people played Diablo 2 and they still do for PvP. It's a solid game. There's a reason why PvP is so popular in Diablo 2. If you go to the quality of life of Diablo 2, it's decent. Obviously, a lot of mods add things like loot filters and more stacking. But, they did a pretty decent job of giving you enough buttons to drop things on the ground and do other stuff of that nature and to access stuff. And it doesn't seem too difficult. Diablo 2's UI was made before the days of consoles, which means if you're playing it on a PC, it's going to look a lot better. Accessibility. Accessibility is, well, it's a 7. You know, it's really good. Um, I think it isn't as accessible as D4 though. It's a little tougher to get into for sure. Once you learn what the basic items are and how to farm them in D2, I think it's pretty darn accessible. But if you never learn those things, it can be very hard to learn how to progress in Diablo 2. Not so much the systems themselves, but the progression is a little challenging. Monster design and identity. I think both D4 and D2R do this very well. I even think the D4 monsters have more identity than the D2 ones. But one thing I will say though is that the D2 ones, I'm gonna give it the same rating because now that I think about it, in D2 there's a lot of monster types that just do very different things. You got some of them like leaping around. I think both games do a really good job having very unique monster experiences and monster interactions. So I think they both did a great job there. You can see my overall rating of Diablo 2, by the way, down here, obviously. Once again, I'm not going to hide it from you guys. You guys can see where I'm coming from the beginning. This is it. I like to think that this isn't just nostalgia bias and the fact that I put so many hours into this game. I'd like to think that this is because I recognize what Diablo 2 does incredibly well and what's incredibly addicting about it, particularly. If you guys play both games a lot, you guys I think might come to similar conclusions. But does this make Diablo 4 a bad game? The fact that it's like 0.9 lower than Diablo 2? No, it just makes Diablo 2 an incredible game that I feel like a lot of developers in modern ARPGs are still not learning some things from. There's so much they could learn from this game, like how well they did itemization, the item drop system. They're just so well done, and they're never replicated to any kind of satisfying respect, which is why a lot of players find themselves returning to D2. And this is also why, even though I plan to play a lot of D4, I feel like returning to D2 is still a thing for me. I love D2, and there's a reason why this game, in a lot of ways, will never be exceeded. But yeah, let's continue though. Endgame. So this is actually where I think D2 is actually significantly worse than D4. This is probably like the biggest negative difference, is that the endgame of D2 or a game like D2R is basically just farm like 1 or 2 areas with your build. You kill the same weak ass bosses, but to be fair, endgame is also totally open, which is not a bad thing. It gives you a lot of freedom to make it what you want. The end game can be trading because there's free trade in Diablo 2. There's PvP that's very satisfying. There's grailing, there's challenges. There's items that you can find for other characters very easily in the game. There's pushing for level 99, which is also very fun in this game. Maybe even more dynamic actually in Diablo 2 in some ways. But does it lack a lot of those endgame systems? Are a lot of them very repetitive? Yes. And this is kind of where Diablo 2 takes a bit of a hit. I don't think it makes it bad as an endgame game, though, because there's a lot of things you can kind of just do. You can make your own endgame. It's kind of like make your own endgame. That's what Diablo 2 is all about. And in some sense, it's bad if you try to judge it fairly against any modern ARPGs, but you gotta also consider that there are some things that it does that in some ways make it better. So, I don't know. Spells are just amazing and iconic. Diablo 2, I'd give it a slightly higher rating for that. They're already both high ratings though. So this is mostly just because trading exists, honestly, and that there's free trade. That's the major that's really the major reason here why you see such a big difference. I still think there's a lot of lacking. There's a lot of outsourcing in terms of communication within the game. General chat doesn't really do it justice in the old system, especially with bots spamming and whatnot. So it's not like it's that much better than D4. I mean, I still rated D4 5.5. Also, the fact that everything can be traded does mean that finding certain things yourself is less impactful. That being said, though, just having that free trade and having more of that interaction and that sharing of items within the group ends up being very good. That's why both the party play and the social ratings are quite a bit higher here for Diablo 2, is that there's just so much more genuine interaction between the players. There's no individual loot. That's another thing to think about here. It really increases the amount of interactivity, even if it's negative, between the players. That's something that a lot of people really enjoy. I mean, I could even put this up to an 8. Honestly, it's not bad. It's not bad. Damage scaling in Diablo 2. No one will complain about Diablo 2 damage scaling because it feels reasonable. But once again, as I've explained before, it's kind of a non-factor. It's really reasonable, and there are no damage numbers to begin with. So there you have it. It's better than D4 in that way. Monetization. I think this is ideal, personally. You don't need a billion massive amounts of systems within your game necessarily. But once again, in the age of big, giant AAA games, I think this is something that's kind of dead. So you don't need to monetize it in 50,000 different ways. And you just allow people to pay for items if they want to. And that doesn't affect the players that don't pay for items. And you just, it's laissez-faire, you know. It's a, I don't know if that's how you say that. Laissez-faire. You know, it's just people doing what they want. Freedom is really important, I think, to a solid gameplay experience. But no one will complain about this game's monetization because it happens totally outside of the... It's not sanctioned by Blizzard whatsoever. I still think the way Diablo 4 did it, though, is like perfect for that size of a game almost. Item appearance on character. Item appearance on character. Looks really good in D2R. They actually improved it massively, so that's really nice. Not as much customization as D4, though, for sure. So D4 definitely hit that one out of the park. And of course, graphics overall, I would actually say they're the same. D2R graphics are incredible for Diablo 2. D4 graphics are incredible for D4. They're both very dark, gothic games. They have different styles, but are both very gritty, and they are great Diablo games in that way. Performance 9. Yeah, it's just performed really bad early on, but where it's at now, it's good. Resource skill interaction, I think it's a little bit more dynamic and feels better than Diablo 4, so it gets a higher rating. Developer communication, about the same. You could even rate this a little bit lower, actually, because I feel like they've communicated a lot more about Diablo 4. You know, I'll use the 0.5 ratings for sure. The ladder system is straightforward, which, you know, by the way, that does include the ladder system of D4. So in D4, not having an infinite Paragon system is already way better as a ladder system than its predecessor. Obviously, I think it just says everything is way better than its predecessor. We're about to go over that, but yeah, it's the case. Crafting, I actually really like crafting in D2. I think it's almost perfect. The items can be impactful if you craft them. The items that drop are just pristine. They can't be altered. I think that's good because it really makes the items feel special. A lot more special, but the way D4 did it isn't bad because they still mostly feel special with just an enchant aspect system with some added on cool stuff. And then the overall game systems in Diablo 2, I think, are also pretty solid. They work really well together. I would rate it slightly higher. I think the systems in that game are just really good. And the incentives are really solid. So overall, what do I come to? I come to the fact that Diablo 2 is a better game than Diablo 4 currently. That could change in the future. It might compete with it just separately or forward. However, it's not to the point that I would say there's a massive gulf And it's to the point to where I feel like as a D2 player, I can enjoy the different aspects of both games, and I can enrich my gaming life by playing both games and not just playing one or two versions of the same game. So that's kind of where I'm at. Now, Diablo 3. Oh man, I am a hater. I'll admit, but at least I know where my biases come from. Here they are, laid out in plain sight. The campaign story was garbage. Deckard Cain died in the most uneventful, stupid way imaginable. It just didn't make any sense. The music in this game was so iconic, it was junk. I mean, yeah, sure, some decent music and decent campaign elements. That's pretty much all it had going for it. Campaign playthrough, yeah, it was decent. For sure. I would definitely say it was better than D4's because there wasn't as quite much to skip through. Awesome. There's some ways it was better than D4 for sure, but not many. Itemization and oh my goodness, this stuff. This is where I actually put my 2, and this is where you can see where I'm coming from. This is why I can't rate D4 a 2, because not like MrLlama. Because look, if we're being real here. Okay, there are some things going for the itemization in D4. It interacts well with the skills. It encourages the trying out of different skill or passive node combinations and paragon combinations. It does. There's a lot of interaction there. There's also a lot of feeling of there's definitely a decent feeling of impact as you upgrade your gear, and you have to pay attention to the items. The items do matter besides just the base stat, even though that does still matter the most, like in D3. And there is some item rarity, and there's some more interesting items like unique items. Diablo 3, this is basically it's just sets. It's like literally like one thing you want to do mostly. Very basic itemization, extremely basic. Numbers are pretty much on the base stat, the main stat, basically the only thing that matters. It's just it's if you think Diablo 4's itemization is lacking, there's nothing more lacking than this almost. And the only way it could go down was that maybe none of the other stats mattered at all, and that would be a 1. But I think they're pretty awful, and there's like no reason that would make you want to play the game to get like anything ultra rare or anything. The game is over the second you acquire certain items, and it's over. Diablo 3, I think, became worse after launch. I actually preferred it on launch, and I thought it was more challenging. The item, because it had maybe some more item rarity, it had some more interesting interactions. They really just made it a dumbed down arcade game. It's hard to even call it a Diablo game, but this is what it is. They improved every one of these systems almost massively on D4. Almost every one of them. Except some things that don't matter much, like the campaign playthrough. Class identity is pretty bad. Every build kind of just like went around and blasted things by the end of it. Maybe D4 will become the same way eventually, but currently every class seems to fit and play quite a bit differently, which is kind of how I understand this one. Build diversity. Yeah, there's some build diversity in D3 for sure, but it's lacking all that skill and stat customization that you get from Paragon and the skill tree in D4, but because all it has is just skills. What is the 100% in D3? Just blasting infinite Paragon? Like it doesn't. There is no 100% in this game. It's trash. Cinematics, yeah, they're always good. It's a Blizzard game. AVP, non-existent. They never could make an interesting system stick, and it was just trash. No one would ever want to do it in this game. Whereas in D4, it's quite a bit different. Quality of life. I mean, it has some. Once again, these don't matter too much, but it has some good quality of life and good game UI. Okay, there you go. D3's got some good stuff. It's very accessible to new players. That is one area where I actually rate it very, very high. Because I feel like anyone can just pick up D3 and understand the whole game from the second they pick it up. But does that really make for a long, enduring lasting, enjoyable game experience. For anyone that really wants to get deeper into the game, no. So basically, it only caters to casual players, whereas D4 does a good job of balancing casual and core players, and then D2 is a little bit more weighted towards core players, but with casual still being able to enjoy it. You have monster design identity. My goodness. My goodness. I don't know. It's just like everything kind of just has tons of... There's just so much screen vomit in Diablo 3. It's ridiculous. Like, if you think D4 is bad, it's not nearly that bad. Yeah, there's a little bit of that going on, but the identity is so much better. I mean, maybe if I'm being fair, I could give it a 6 there, but it's really awful. Endgame. The endgame is literally an infinite grind of Paragon. Because there's no endpoint, you just feel like you're literally doing the exact same thing, which is greater rifts. There's literally no other systems that exist in this game at all. Even the bosses Bosses in D4 are massive improvement over D3, by the way. So once again, like, nothing here going for it. Nothing going for it. It's very, very bland. Spells, yeah, some interesting looking spells if you don't count the vomit on the screen. That some of this, way more issues with this and colorful type problems than D4 were. It might just be the amount of color or like color palette, but it really has a problem in this game. Social, yeah, I mean, how could you have social in a game where it's individualized loot and there's zero trading? Not even a clan system, nothing. Game was trash. Party play was okay though. It's okay. I could even rate it maybe like a 6 here, if I'm being a bit more, generous. But because you can do it, and it doesn't feel terrible to group up with others, but it also doesn't feel nearly as dynamic or impactful as all the systems like incense and all the buffs and things that are much more D2 like in D4, by the way. Damage scaling. Well, I mean, if that means something to you, which once again, you can't turn off the numbers in D3. So yeah, have fun with screen vomit. Giant, enormous numbers. Yeah, definitely. They definitely have some multipliers going way out of control in D3 for sure. Way more than D4. Monetization. Not even close. Monetization, I can't rate this good because, like, getting rid of trading entirely is not the right way to monetize the game. And the Real Money Auction House wasn't a bad approach actually in the beginning, but they tossed it. Because if they're going to have it in-house, I mean, if they're going to have trading, they may as well have it in-house. That's the way I see it. And trading is good. I think more interactivity and, interactions between players is good. So I don't see this as being good. Yeah, sure, there's not over-monetization of the game, but game development basically died on the game. They got rid of the free trade. And then it's like, it's just not good because of that. This is not the right approach to monetization. This Diablo 3 is not a good approach. It's not as bad as pay to win, which would be like a 1, but it's bad. Because once again, if you monetize it like this, what do you got to do to the item system? Yeah, throw it in the toilet. I talked about that earlier. Cosmetics. I mean, that's what you have to do by necessity. Cosmetics. Yeah, I mean, your character looks kind of cool. They don't try to sell more interesting ones, but honestly, they're pretty bland. Almost all the figures and all the character models in D3 kind of look like each other once they have gear. It's pretty bad. I don't like it at all. Graphics overall, I think a 4 is generous here. I'm gonna leave it though. Yeah, colorful World of Warcraft graphics. This game does not look like a Diablo game at all. Like, at all. Not whatsoever. Yeah, it's just really bad, colorful screen vomit. Yeah, it just doesn't look good at all as a Diablo game. Entertainment, it could be somewhat decent for like a weekend, and that's kind of where the rating of like 4 comes from. I would even put the graphics at like a 3.5, maybe the overall entertainment at like a 5. I don't know. I think there's some entertainment value to D3, but mostly just playing through the game, and I don't know. It's got to be the most mind-numbing, brain-dead game grind like ever. Performance. Um, it's I think I was mostly rating it on launch here, which maybe I should have been more fair with D2R, because that performance was kind of not that great. So I could definitely reduce that down a bit. Um, I think so. I think that's fair. Let's get rid of some of the decimals. There you go. But yeah, it was really terrible launch. It was barely playable. Could definitely rate this like a 3 as well. Resource skill interaction, an 8. Yeah, it had pretty good resource skill interactions because it was like a zoomy game where you didn't have to worry about your resources, so just had to spam abilities. I mean, I'll say it had a good interaction between those things, I guess, but not very interesting otherwise. Developer communication, pretty weak on this game. They did a much worse job than the other 2 games prior to launch, and even continuing to develop the game, making a lot of players pretty angry. Paragon ladder system. Now, don't get me wrong, D3 sold a lot of copies, but they mostly rode off the backs of their predecessor, D2, I believe, and that's why they sold so many copies. I think most of their monetization was front loaded. You know, they got quite a bit from their Reapers of Souls expansion, but I don't know, man. So much more potential, and it just was totally unrealized. I mean, there's a lot more gamers these days too. I mean, there's just a lot of things to take into account if you're trying to compare it to back then, and I feel like they fell short of expectations in so many ways. Their ladder system is trash. It's an infinite grind just to see who is the most no-lifer grinder that has no life, and it doesn't really it doesn't test a player's abilities at all. Crafting, is that a thing in this game? No, not really. Yeah, it might have some of the similar things they implement in D4, but they implement them badly. Maybe we'll maybe give it a bit of a bump there though, just for fun. Overall game systems, it's not good. Like the game just ends up power creep city with like one thing to do basically in the end game. So yeah, like, all right, that's it. That's my final evaluation. This is a huge long video, and you guys want to sit through a very thorough evaluation, I gave it to you. I can promise you one thing. This game, Diablo 4, is way better than D3 ever was, even from the get-go. And I'm really excited to see how they continue to maybe improve some of these systems. Maybe one of the developers will watch this and be like, okay, this seems like a very reasonable approach to it. And, maybe there is some improvement here. It's not just a Diablo 2 player, looking at Diablo 2 with rose-colored glasses and then rating everything in Diablo 4 bad, when they actually put really solid effort into most of these systems in Diablo 4. Even the itemization is not terrible. It's decent. I think it's got solid aspects to it. It maybe just needs more development, which we're probably waiting for in further expansions. I'm not convinced that it's the most amazing part of the game currently. I definitely don't think so. But yeah, I mean, I don't really see anything that I can rate Diablo 4 on really badly. It's just there isn't anything that's like, wow, this is the worst possible way they could do it, or wow, they put no thought into this whatsoever. Everything seems to have enough positives to at least get it to that 5 mark. That being said, if they want to make this game a timeless classic like D2, there's still a lot of work to go. Anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Let me know if you think I was fair, if I wasn't fair, or otherwise. Remember, you could always catch me at www.twitch.tv/darkhumanity for 6 to 7 days a week of Diablo 2 action. I will try to break this up into chapters to some extent, but it might be pretty difficult. I think I'll just separate it into my review of MrLlama's video, my review of D2R, and you can just check them all out. Anyways, I hope this wasn't overly harsh. I love you, MrLlama. See this, or if anyone, this is not meant to be this is not a war. I'm not making it. I mean, you're way bigger than I am, man. So don't worry about that. I'm just observing what I observe and giving my thoughts. I think personally your review was not fair. As much as you put fair in the title, I don't think so. And I felt like I had to set a little bit of the record straight. But anyways, Dark Humility over and out. See you guys at twitch.tv/darkhumility. And for more Diablo action, let's get it.